Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. It's Pride! Magic Presents Pride is a casual commander event Wizards has brought back this June. You build a commander deck, treating every eligible commander as though it had the partner keyword, because anyone can be with anyone. Then you show up at your local game store and play Commander, hopefully against other Pride decks. This year, participants are supposed to receive this sweet foil Gilded Lotus promo, as well as an enamel pin of that lotus. Local game stores can schedule Pride events for June 5th through 14th in these select regions, so check with your local game store to see if they're running one. And if they aren't, ask them to. The event is early in the month this year, so plan accordingly, but you can still play your Pride deck as a Rule 0 deck anytime. Just ask your pod and shuffle up. This event was how I launched my channel last year, so my Monday deck techs during June will all be Pride decks. Anyway, let's get to it. As you see, today our commanders are Greasefang Okiba Boss and Shorikai Genesis Engine. This is actually an update to the very first video I made for the channel. I've learned a lot since then, so I believe this list is much improved from before. Cheaper too. Before we check them out, however, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I thought it deserved a deck of its own, or a deck of their own in this case. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever my commanders ask of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, and I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands. That way I can always hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play commander. So let's talk about our commanders. Greasefang Okiba Boss is a 4/3 legendary rat pilot for 1, a white and a black, that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of your next end step. And Shorikai Genesis Engine is an 8/8 legendary artifact vehicle for 2, a white and a blue, that says pay 1 and tap to draw 2 cards, then discard a card, and create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token. With this token, cruise vehicles as though its power were 2 greater, so a Kamigawa Neon Dynasty pilot token. And Shorikai Cruise for 8. So Shorikai is strong. It gives us access to both card advantage and graveyard filling in the command zone, plus it trains Kamigawa pilot tokens to give us drivers when we need them. And once we cruise Shorikai, it's an enormous 8/8 body, something we rarely see when Octopus aren't involved. But as powerful as Shorikai is, this is a Greasefang deck. Our favorite biker gang leader is here to fix up our mini jalopies and take them for joyrides before sending them back to the showroom. Her ability pulls vehicles out of the yard and lets us slam in with them right away. They bounce to our hand if they survive the turn, but we really don't care if they do because that would just put them back in the graveyard for Greasefang to reanimate next turn. But how do we get them into the graveyard in the first place? Well, the best way is with our huge mecha buddy. We draw 2, then discard the best vehicle we're holding, giving us both a card we can reanimate with Greasefang right away and 2 more cards in hand. And if that puts our hand size over the limit, we'll be forced to use our cleanup step to fill our bin with even more great hits. But Shorikai isn't the only way to pack our graveyard. We have discard effects that give us value in addition to putting vehicles in our bin, including looting them away so that we even get a replacement card in the process. We also have sacrifice outlets that we can use to squeeze a little bit more mileage out of our vehicles after they've attacked. We even have a little bit of self-mill, which, as usual for graveyard decks, is practically card advantage. Like any good mechanic, we know how to get things working for us. Between our token generators that give us more creatures to pilot our fleet, recursion abilities to take advantage of our stocked junkyard, and synergies for our armloads of artifacts and other historic spells, this deck is fun and fast. Combat is where the rubber meets the road, and we're less worried about staying in our lane than we are about hitting the red line with each of our dangerous, expendable vehicles. They don't have to be street legal to stay in overdrive. Where our opponent's game plans are drifting, ours is driven. And once they're choking on our exhaust, we'll turn to our partner riding shotgun and give them the look that says, first date or last, we're packed and ready to roll. You'll enjoy this deck if you like a splashy reanimator strategy with an unusual mechanical theme and a racing vibe, or if you like humming Kenny Loggins as you turn your stuff sideways and take your opponents on a ride into the danger zone. So as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will see a considering section, filled with cards that I considered putting into the deck, but ultimately which didn't make the cut for me. However, if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you like what I've done here and you want to do it even more than I did, or if you're interested in some of the other ways you can take these two commanders, that considering section is a great place for you to begin and get inspiration when you build your own Greasefang and Shorikai deck. So let's start our engine. We're going to start with the section of the deck that is most relevant to us, which is our vehicles section. These are all cards that either are, or in one instance, make vehicles for us. Imposter Mech is our first one. This is a single, well, it's 1 in a blue, sorry, for a 3/1 vehicle that crews for 3, that says you may have this vehicle enter as a copy of a creature an opponent controls, except it's a vehicle artifact with crew 3 and loses all other card types. So, pretty nice for us to be able to say what's the scariest or most valuable creature on the battlefield that we don't control, and we get to have our Imposter Mech come in and get all of the abilities of that creature. It also gets the power and toughness of that creature, just a sweet copy effect. Especially because we can use this to immediately attack if, of course, we're bringing it back with Greasefang. It has crew 3, so Greasefang herself can crew it, and then we get to swing in with that creature and get whatever abilities it has until end of turn, or until it dies during combat. Which means Imposter Mech will go back to the graveyard and we can bring it back next turn, maybe as a different creature, and get even more value out of it. It's pretty nice because it also, since it enters as a copy of that creature, if that creature has any sort of when this creature enters triggers, then we get that triggered ability as well. Cool. Next up is Reckoner Bankbuster, which was banned in Standard when it was in it. This is 2 generic mana for a 4/4 vehicle that crews for 3 and says pay 2 and tap to remove a charge counter from this vehicle. Oh, I'm sorry, it enters with 3 charge counters on it. If we do that, we draw a card. Then if there are no charge counters on it, we make a treasure, and we make one of those Kamigawa pilot tokens, a 1/1 that crews vehicles as though its power were 2 higher. So this is a pretty sweet ability for us to get a cheap vehicle that crews relatively easily in our deck and is a 4/4, so a solid body. And it just sits on the battlefield, giving us the ability to sort of crack it as a clue 3 turns in a row. Just pay 2, tap it, and draw a card. And the third one of those times, we have no more charge counters on it, so we also get a treasure and a pilot token, and that's pretty nice. At that point, we can just use Reckoner Bankbuster to attack or block or otherwise just sacrifice it, put it back in the graveyard, and then use Greasefang to reanimate it, at which point we can either attack with it if we want to, like we would with the normal uses of many of our vehicles, or we can just pay the 2 and tap it to just draw a card. And assuming it survives that turn, it'll bounce to our hand, where we can recast it next turn for just 2 and start the process all over again. A lot of repeatable value in the Bankbuster, in addition to being a solid body once it's crewed. Yeah, it works for me. Next up is Smuggler's Copter. The Looter Scooter is here. It's 2 generic mana for a 3/3 vehicle with flying that crews for only 1. And when it attacks or blocks, we can choose to draw a card, and if we do, we discard a card. So putting cards in our graveyard, like I've mentioned, is great in this deck because we have so many cards that are vehicles that we can just reanimate with Greasefang. Plus, being able to fly in with a 3/3 is really solid, and again, if we're discarding something, that means we've also drawn something. So we either discarded the card that we drew, meaning our hand is the same number it was at before, or we discarded something that we want in the graveyard so we can bring it back, so we're kind of ahead. Nice. Next is Brotherhood Vertibird. This is a very simple one. 3 generic mana for a star 4 vehicle that has power equal to the number of artifacts we control. It crews for 2 and it flies. So this is a really sweet one. As the game goes on, we build up a slow sort of critical mass of artifacts because even though it seems like the deck is full of artifacts, a lot of them are vehicles that we're going to be putting in our graveyard, then returning to the battlefield, and they don't stick around on the battlefield. They're either going to die or they're going to go back to our hand as part of Greasefang's delayed trigger at the end of our turn. But eventually, we get plenty of artifacts in play, plus we do have some tokens that can help us with that, and Brotherhood Vertibird just gets bigger and bigger every time. Being able to come in from the graveyard even as at least a 1/4, since it is a vehicle artifact itself, so it's at least a power of 1, and being able to fly in, that's pretty great. Next we have Cultivator's Caravan. Gotta put this in basically every vehicle deck. It's a Manalith, a 3 mana artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color, but it's also a vehicle that crews for 3 and is power and toughness 5/5. So we can use this every turn once we've cast it to make mana, or if we need to attack with it, we can attack with it. If we don't want to do either, we can hold it up and crew it in response on an opponent's turn, since you can crew at instant speed as opposed to like stationing or saddling. We can use this as a 5/5 blocker. The Caravan does everything we need it to. It's also worth remembering that the Caravan, if we reanimate it with Greasefang, comes in and has haste. So even if we crew it or not, it can tap for mana that turn, rather than maybe attacking. So a nice way to get a little bit of extra mana out of our graveyard if we need to. Next we have Night Scythe. This is from the Warhammer 40k decks. 3 generic mana gives us a 3/1 flying vehicle that crews for 2 with an ability called Evasion Beams. When it enters, we make a 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. So this is a card that comes in company. Or enters in company, I should say. Very nice to be able to say, we're going to spend this for 3, and we get a 3/1 flyer that crews for 2, which is not the best combination of stats and crew number, but it does come with a 2/2 that can crew it right away. And every time we reanimate this with Greasefang, it's going to make us another 2/2 that we can use as a chump blocker, as a pilot, whatever we may need. Plus, that Necron is an artifact, meaning things like Brotherhood Vertibird are going to count it toward our artifact count and just become even better. Next up, we have the Peace Walker Colossus. This is a 3 generic mana, 6/6 vehicle that crews for 4. Remember, Greasefang has a power of 4. But it also says, for 1 and a white, another target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So we don't have to crew this in order to activate that ability, but it gives us the same effect as if we had crewed a different vehicle. So if we don't want to use our creatures to crew our vehicles, we can just spend 2 mana to activate the Colossus and use it to crew our vehicles that way, which is especially nice because remember, this ability, just like crewing, can be used at instant speed. So if we have a bunch of vehicles in play and we've tapped out all of our creatures, our opponents might say, well, your shield's down, we're going to attack you. Then we activate the Colossus to surprise our opponents. We just can't animate the Colossus itself with this effect because it says another target vehicle, but we bring our Cultivator's Caravan online or our Reckoner Bankbuster, whatever it may be, for just mana, and we have surprise blockers. Cool. Prodigy's Prototype is next. This is 1, a white and a blue, for a 3/4 vehicle that crews for 2, that says whenever 1 or more vehicles you control attack, create one of the Kamigawa pilot tokens, a 1/1 that crews vehicles as though its power were 2 or greater. So this is, once we get things going, every turn we get a pilot, including if we reanimate the Prototype, crew it, and attack with it, it's going to make a pilot because it's 1 or more vehicles. So this is 1 extra token creature every turn, essentially, while this is in play or in our graveyard, if it's not, if there's not something better for us to reanimate. And those pilots do a lot for us. Being able to crew like they're 3/1s is very strong. Next up, we have the Falcon, Airship Restored. This is from the Final Fantasy Commander decks. This is 2 and a black for a 4/3 legendary artifact vehicle that crews for 2 and flies. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we may sacrifice it. We don't have to, but we sure can. And if we do, we return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Meaning, maybe this is in the graveyard, whether because we've sacrificed it or not. We bring it back with Greasefang, we attack with Greasefang, or we attack with the airship after crewing this with Greasefang, and then if it does combat damage to a player, which is not usually that hard because not every player in Commander always has flying blockers or reach blockers, we can have the Falcon go back to the graveyard so that we can do this with it again next turn, but also bring back any of our creature cards that may have ended up there. Or if it's the case that the Falcon is just in play and Greasefang dies, we can use the Falcon to bring Greasefang back. We just have to have a different creature to crew it. Neat. In addition, we can just pay 4 and a black to return it from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is also at instant speed, so for sort of the general cost to reanimate something, which is 5 mana in black, we can just do that to the Falcon at instant speed, and it comes back tapped. That's sweet. Next up, we have Conqueror's Galleon. This is such a cool card that does not remain as a vehicle for us. This is 4 generic mana for a 2/10 vehicle that crews for 4. So again, Greasefang can crew it. 2/10 is really more of a blocker generally. However, when it attacks, we create a delayed trigger that at the end of combat will exile it and then return it to the battlefield transformed under our control. Notably, it does not say return to the battlefield tapped. It just comes back transformed. So as long as this attacks and survives combat, which it probably will, it's going to flip into Conqueror's Foothold, a land card. That land can tap for colorless. We can pay 2 and tap it to draw and then discard, so we get a 2-mana loot. We can pay 4 and tap it to just draw without discarding, or we can pay 6 and tap it to return a card from our graveyard to our hand. So just expensive regrowth, but in our land base. Pretty great. Yeah, Conqueror's Galleon is really neat to be able to discard it to one of our discard effects, then bring it back with Greasefang, attack with it, it probably doesn't die, and it's not going to go back to our hand because it's going to, at the end of combat, exile itself and come back transformed as a land, so it'll just stay in play. And we've gotten so much more value out of Greasefang. Next up is Mu Yanling Wind Rider. This is from Ether Drift, and it is not a vehicle. It's a pilot. This is 2 and double blue for a 2/4 legendary human wizard pilot that when she enters, makes a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. So this is one of the vehicle tokens from Ether Drift, and it's pretty nice. A 3/2 that crews for 1 is nothing special, but it's also nothing to sneeze at. And if we're able to get Mu Yanling into play and then reanimate her at some point, not obviously with Greasefang, but with something like Conqueror's Foothold, then we'll be able to get that token again. More importantly though, Mu gives all of our vehicles flying, including that token that she made. So that's pretty alright on its own. In addition, whenever one or more creatures we control with flying deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So it only works on flyers, and it's 1 or more creatures, so this is not Coastal Piracy. But it does say to a player, not to any number of players, meaning if we send our vehicles at multiple different players, this is going to trigger for each player that takes the combat damage from those flyers. And since all of our vehicles have flying, unless our opponents have something to take that away, this essentially gives all of our vehicles this ability to maybe draw us a card or even a couple of cards if we can hit multiple players. Nice. Ribskiff is next. I just really like this card. This is just really useful in a Greasefang deck, and so in this deck it works even better. This is 4 generic mana for a 4/4 vehicle that crews for 3 and has Toxic 2. Toxic 2 is an ability, it's not a triggered ability, that says whenever this does combat damage to a player, or not, I'm sorry, I'm phrasing it like a triggered ability. It's players that are dealt combat damage by the Ribskiff get 2 poison counters. They just get 2 of them, which is 20% of the way to them dying from poison. Now this is not a poison deck, but it's nice to be able to have a little toxic in this. That toxic ability does not go away if this loses any of its power. If it's just not affected by it. As long as it does any amount of combat damage to a player, that player will get 2 poison counters as part of them taking that damage. So yeah, Toxic 2 is kind of a nice little benefit, but we really more care about the fact that when this enters, we draw a card. So we reanimate this with Greasefang, it comes in, we draw a card. We attack with it, it dies, goes to the graveyard, we reanimate it next turn with Greasefang, we draw another card. Maybe it doesn't die, it goes back to our hand. Well, we recast it next turn, we draw a card. We can get a lot of cards with the Ribskiff over the course of the game. Even if it's just 1 card, it's replaced itself. And if that card came into our hand by us discarding the Ribskiff and it coming back from Greasefang, we're already doing well. Plus, it's got Crew 3, I should mention, which any of our little Kamigawa pilot tokens can crew 3 just on their own. Next up we have Surge Hacker Mech. This seems very conditional, but in a deck like ours, it's so much fun. This is 4 generic mana for a 5/5 vehicle with crew 4 and Menace. So a little bit of a higher crew number, but a little bit of built-in evasion. And a different kind of evasion, which is the removal. When it enters, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles we control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So we can hit planeswalkers, we can hit creatures. Even if this is our only vehicle, well, that's 1, so it's going to do 2 damage, so that's a free shock that it comes in with. Then we crew it, and it's a 5/5 Menace, and that's pretty good. Next up, we have the Fire Nation Drill. This is from the Avatar: The Last Airbender set. 2 and double black for a 6/3 vehicle, a legendary vehicle, with crew 2 and trample. It says when it enters, we may tap it, and when we do, we destroy target creature with power 4 or less. This is kind of an interesting deal. we can have this come back from Greasefang. You know, it's in our graveyard, we bring it back with Greasefang, it enters, and we have the ability to tap it in order to just kill a creature power 4 or less. We don't have to, but we can, and that's a nice little benefit. If we choose not to, however, Greasefang's given it haste until end of turn, and it's a 6/3 trample that we can crew with basically everything. In addition, the Fire Nation Drill says we can pay a single generic mana, and permanents our opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this is a great ability for us to use, not just when we are attacking and an opponent has a indestructible blocker, or when we are trying to remove something that our opponent has and they've got something with hexproof. It's not just great then. If this is on our battlefield, or on our playmat rather, when someone board wipes, and they decide to try and protect their creatures with something like Heroic Intervention or anything along those lines, even though we know the board wipe is going to kill all of our creatures, which may include the Fire Nation Drill if it is a creature at the time, we can activate it, and no one's stuff that has indestructible or hexproof gets to keep it. So they get affected. You know, if you have an opponent who's doing like a big board wipe with their, I don't know, their black and green deck, and they've Heroic Intervention in response to their own board wipe, let Heroic Intervention resolve, then activate the Fire Nation Drill. All of those things that gained hexproof and indestructible lose it, and they get board wiped too. This can just be a lot of fun as a sort of repeatable removal effect when we keep bringing this back with Greasefang, but also it's got other good utilities, and it's a 6/3 trampler, which is not nothing. Next up is the Indomitable. This is Admiral Beckett Brass's ship. Admiral Beckett Brass is the legend from Original Ixalan, who was the very first commander deck I ever built in paper. So I've got a lot of affection for the Indomitable, even though it was not printed until Lost Caverns of Ixalan. So 2 and double blue for a 6/6 legendary vehicle that crews for 3. It has trample, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. It just is Coastal Piracy. So even if we just have this in play, or we reanimate it with Greasefang and we crew it and we attack with it, it's pretty likely to do damage as a 6/6 trample, and we're going to be able to draw cards better than even Muyanling lets us. In addition, we can cast this card from our graveyard as long as we control 3 or more tapped pirates and or vehicles. Not many pirates in this deck, but plenty of vehicles, so being able to attack with several vehicles, and as long as they survive combat, which is not hard for them to do, we go to our second main phase, we've got 3 tapped vehicles, and we're all set. We can just go ahead and cast the Indomitable from our graveyard. Or, remember, a vehicle, when it is crewed, just becomes an artifact creature. That's all crewing does. Which means, if we have a whole lot of vehicles, which sometimes happens in this deck, all in play, and we're not worried about needing them to block, we can crew a vehicle, then use it to crew another vehicle, then use it to crew another vehicle, just daisy chain our vehicle crewing each other. They can't crew themselves, that's a rule in Magic, but they can crew other vehicles because, of course, they are themselves creatures once they're crewed. So that's a way for us to not have to risk our vehicles in combat if we want to be able to recast the Indomitable, since all of those vehicles that crewed each other are tapped down now. Remember, it's also possible to overcrew. In addition to saying like, well, this is crew 3, I'm going to tap, 2 of my 2/2 creatures and overcrew it. Or I'm going to tap one of my 3/3 creatures and another 3/3 creature at the same time to overcrew it. That just crews it once. But you can also activate the crew ability once it's already been crewed. It doesn't lose that ability. So if you have a 3/3 and you want to crew the Indomitable, let's say you tap it down and you crew it, then you have priority again, you tap your next 3/3 to crew it again. So you're able to do that if you want with multiple vehicles in order to get them tapped to recast the Indomitable from the graveyard. Lots of fun tricks that you can do with vehicles. There's a reason why saddling mounts and stationing spacecraft doesn't work that way. And also, I guess, planets. But yeah, the Indomitable's a lot of fun. Next, we have the Regalia. This is a card from the Final Fantasy set. It's 4 generic mana for a 4/4 legendary vehicle with haste. Even though Greasefang gives haste when we reanimate our vehicles, the Regalia just has it, and it crews for only 1. Very cheap. And it says, whenever the Regalia attacks, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Which means we play the Regalia, we crew it immediately, we attack with it. It doesn't matter if it dies because we can bring it back with the Greasefang, but it guarantees that if there is a land left in our graveyard, we're going to find it and put it on the battlefield tapped. So this is a terrific acceleration piece. Get it? Yeah. Next up, we are looking at the Weatherlight. Love this one. From Dominaria 2018, and also from the lore. It's been around forever. This is the new Weatherlight, but yeah, great. This is 4 generic mana for a 4/5 legendary vehicle that crews for 3 and flies. It says, whenever the Weatherlight deals combat damage to a player, we look at the top 5 cards of our library, we can reveal a historic card from among them, put it in our hand, and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Historic cards are all artifacts, all legendary cards, and any saga enchantments. So we have, I think, 53 cards in our deck that are historic, which includes the Weatherlight and includes our 2 commanders, but that's still more than 50 cards that we're able to put into our hand with the Weatherlight and then cast. So essentially the Weatherlight makes it very likely, if we're digging 5 cards deep, that every time it does combat damage to a player, we're going to draw a card. Sweet. Next up is Foreboding Steamboat. I went back and forth about this card a little bit, but I think it's stronger than it looks. This is from Murders at Karlov Manor Commander. This is 3 and double black for a 5/7 vehicle that crews for 2, so a big body. Even though it's 5 mana, we're reanimating it, so what do we care? It says when it enters, each player chooses 2 non-token, non-vehicle creatures they control. Exile them until this vehicle leaves the battlefield. So this is an Oblivion Ring effect, like a Banishing Light, or whatever you want to call it, a Fiend Hunter effect, that sort of deal. But it works on non-token creatures only, so they can't throw away their tokens, and it doesn't work on vehicles. We don't get to choose which creatures that player is going to exile, or that we're going to exile under the Steamboat. That player does, but it is 2 of them. So if they only have 1 or 2 creatures, they don't get a choice. So probably they're going to give us the 2 worst creatures they have, or the 2 creatures they have that they're expecting to get back, except for the fact that it says whenever the Steamboat attacks, we put a card exiled with it into its owner's graveyard, and if we do, we investigate. So it is a little roundabout to say we're going to exile one of your creatures, then attack with this, and put that creature in the graveyard. That's basically just destroy target creature. But we don't get to target because they're choosing it. We do get to choose which of those creatures is going into their graveyard, and we get a clue token because that's what Investigate does. It makes us an artifact token called a clue that says pay 2 and sack this token to draw a card. So it gets us a little bit of slow card advantage over the course of continuing to do this, but it's really nice because we bring this back with Greasefang and we look at the opponent we want to attack and we just get rid of 2 of their blockers. You know, they get to choose which 2, but if they only have, 1, 2, maybe 3 creatures, we're suddenly down to the likelihood that they're not going to block at all, because if they're down to just 1 creature, are they going to block our 5/7 or are they just going to take the damage? They probably just take the damage so they don't lose another creature, especially because when this is attacking, one of the creatures they gave us is now in their graveyard, and we get a clue token, which means we've removed 2 creatures from play. 1 has essentially died without getting any death triggers, so all those Aristocrats players are crying over this, and the likelihood that they're going to block our huge 5/7 that's attacking now is pretty low, because they know if they kill it, we're just going to get it back later. And they know if they wait, it's going to bounce to our hand unless we get rid of it another way, which is the same thing for them, because it gets their creature that we didn't put in their graveyard back into play once this leaves the battlefield. So this is a fun card. There's a lot of interesting lines you can take with it, and I just think it's cool. So it belongs in a cool deck. Next up is Knight Paladin, another Warhammer 40k card. 5 generic mana gets us a 6/6 vehicle that crews for 1 with trample. 6/6 trample, crews for 1, that's amazing. And it has a rapid fire battle cannon that says when it enters, it deals 4 damage to each opponent. That is 1/10 of a commander player's starting life total. So we play this, crew it, attack with it. It's already done 4 damage when it came in. Maybe it dies or we sacrifice it somehow. then we just reanimate it with Greasefang, and every time we do, each opponent's losing 4 life, and we're attacking with a 6/6 Trampler. This is a great one to keep bringing back over and over. Next, we have Mole Module from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Commander product, or I guess the Eternal product. This is 5 generic mana for a 6/6 vehicle that crews for 2 that has Menace. So it's not a 6/6 Trample that crews for 1 like the last card, but still pretty good. 6/6 Menace can be better than Trample sometimes, depending on what their plan for blocking is. And crew 2 is not much more difficult for us to crew than crew 1 is. It says, whenever this vehicle deals combat damage to a player, we mill 4 cards and we can put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield, directly onto the battlefield. So notice, we are only running 6 cards in this deck that are not permanent cards. So the Mole Module is so likely for us to find a permanent among those 4 that we milled and get it into play. It can be a land, which means that it doesn't even say it comes in tapped. So if we find like a basic land or some other land that is not a tap land, we have just accelerated ourselves. If we find a huge vehicle, which if you look at our curve for this deck, we've got a lot of expensive permanents simply because vehicles can be pricey but they usually outshine their mana value in terms of their stats and abilities, since they require that crewing in order to be used as a creature. So Mole Module is pretty likely to find us something great and put it directly into play. But most importantly, it puts something into play that isn't a vehicle. Sometimes it will be. Sometimes that's the best option for us among those 4. But if we take our vehicles and leave them in the graveyard, Greasefang can get them back for us. And we just get back whatever else was best for us, whether it's a land, whether it's a creature, our 1 enchantment in the deck. Yeah, this can be really great for us. And I know I'm talking about Greasefang a lot rather than Shorikai, but we've seen Shorikai's value. Shorikai makes us pilot tokens, Shorikai gives us cards, both in hand and in our graveyard, and Shorikai sits around waiting for Greasefang to have enough power, or for Shorikai itself to have made enough pilots to help Greasefang crew it, so that it can attack in as a huge 8/8, which, typically, in this deck, I don't use Shorikai as an attacker, unless it looks like the way is clear. Shorikai doesn't have any, evasion of note. Am I forgetting Shorikai has evasion? No. Shorikai is just an 8/8 that has a great activated ability. So typically, Shorikai sits around waiting to block, because an 8/8 blocker is a huge threat. If we've got 3 of our little Kamigawa pilot tokens in play, Shorikai is just going to sit there and be crewable anytime by the 3 of them, and then we've got a good blocker every time we're not just activating Shorikai to make more pilots, draw more cards, and put more cards in our graveyard. So, back to where we were though. We were just finishing up the Mole Module. Let's talk about the Mysterious Limousine now. I really love this card. This is 3 and double white for a 4/4 vehicle that crews for 2 that does a crazy thing. It says, when it enters or attacks, exile up to 1 target creature until this vehicle leaves the battlefield. Other creature. But it does not say that an opponent controls, so we can hit one of our own creatures with this, even Greasefang, or even a crewed vehicle, I suppose. And then, if a creature is put into exile this way, return each other card exiled with this vehicle to the battlefield under its owner's control. So it's a limousine. It enters or attacks, and it picks someone up. And if anyone was already in it, that person gets out. So we use this as a removal spell. In Commander, one of the best things to hit is someone else's commander, because we cast this spell for 5 mana, and now we have Oblivion Ring to their commander. Either they have to leave it under the limousine, meaning they've got to find a way to deal with that limousine as just an artifact, because there's no guarantee that their creature removal spells will work on it, because we might not ever crew it. Or they put their commander back in the command zone, accruing the commander tax and slowing them down. Then they cast their commander again, and we just attack with the limousine and exile it again, or exile someone else's commander. Or, of course, we could hit anyone else's creatures of any sort. If they've got a huge, 8/8 octopus token or something, or Kraken token from, Ominous Seas, we just get rid of it. It's a token. It's gone forever. And that's just from attacking, or just from the limousine entering, which is even better. Because if we have the limousine in our graveyard, we reanimate it with Greasefang, it enters and it exiles something. we exile the thing that is most advantageous to us, like the biggest, scariest blocker that they have. Or, more importantly, a creature that has a lot of modifications to it, that has a lot of counters, or has equipment attached, or auras enchanting it, or just a commander that we think is going to be dangerous for us. Because again, if we exile a commander, they've got to decide, are they going to let us, are they going to get it back? Or do they want to put it in the command zone? Because who knows what we're going to do next. We're in a blue deck, we might have a spell that ends the turn, which means if that creature is in exile, we could end the turn, which makes it so the limousine doesn't leave play, which means there is no delayed trigger that would put their commander back into their hand, or back into play. So yeah, there's fun stuff we can do with that, but the point is, we can also have this re-enter with Greasefang, exile either a creature we don't like, or a creature we want to reset because it has counters or attachments, or even one of our own creatures that has an enters trigger. And then we crew this and go to combat with it. It will trigger again. We get rid of a blocker or another commander or anything else that's dangerous for us, and whatever we exiled before will come back. If it can. If it was a token, it's gone forever. If it was another player's creature that had a bunch of modifications to it, it comes back, but the modifications are gone. If it was one of our creatures that has a cool enters trigger, then it comes back and gets that enters trigger again. This is a really sweet card that we can do a lot of fun things with. And again, as is true with all of our vehicles, if this dies in combat, who cares? It's going to come back anyway next turn with Greasefang if it's our best option. And if it's not our best option, that means we have a better option than it. One thing that's worth noting, though, is whatever we exile on the attack trigger, if we have reanimated this with Greasefang, if the limousine does not leave play, that creature's going to doesn't leave play from combat. It's going to leave play when we bounce it to our hand at the end of turn, thanks to the Greasefang delayed trigger. So we want to make sure that whatever we are exiling, both when this enters and when it attacks, doesn't give the player that controls that too much value, unless we're using it politically. For example, if we're reanimating this with Greasefang, we know it's going to exile something on enter and then again on attack. So we might say, hey, player A, I know you've got that sweet card that draws you cards when it comes into play. Maybe you have like or just like a Solemn Simulacrum that lets you rampant growth when it enters. I'll tell you what, if you leave me alone for a turn cycle, I'll give you a free land in play. And they'll say, well, how are you going to do that? We'll say, watch this. Mysterious Limousine comes in. I want to consider, I haven't done it yet, I'm not going to declare it, but I'm going to consider exiling your said robot. Which means when we crew an attack with the limousine, the sad robot's going to come back in under your control, and you're going to get another rampant growth effect. Which they'll say, oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I wasn't probably going to attack you anyway. I mean, maybe I would have, but now I won't in order to get that free land. Or, if they have something better, their enters triggers or even their leaves the battlefield triggers are something that we can manipulate with Mysterious Limousine in a political way. Just pretty fun. Yeah, I just think this is a cool card. Yeah. So next up is Possession Engine. This is another interesting one that works kind of like the limousine, but not quite. This is 3 and double blue for a 5/5 vehicle that crews for 3 that says, when it enters, gain control of target creature and opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. So Possession Engine doesn't O-ring another creature. It steals it. So what we want to do is steal a creature that an opponent controls that has at least power of 3, so we can then use that creature to crew the Possession Engine. The idea is we've stolen a shark. We've nabbed one of our opponent's creatures, and we're forcing them to be a pilot for us, whether they're driving the Possession Engine or they're helping to pilot Shorikai, whatever it may be, they can't attack or block anyway. So we're getting whatever value they have from their abilities, and we're getting value from their power in the form of them being a pilot for us. Possession Engine is sweet, even if all it's doing is being reanimated with Greasefang and then getting a blocker out of the way. Because this is this is a little different than a lot of our vehicles in the sense that when it enters, it steals an opponent's creature, which is essentially, it comes with its own pilot. So we can use Greasefang to crew something else if Greasefang's 4 power is better than the power of whatever we've stolen. Remember, this is also just changing control of a creature. That creature isn't changing zones, which means if we take someone's commander with this, whether this is being reanimated with Greasefang, meaning it's only going to last until end of turn, or we're casting it, meaning it's going to last as long as this vehicle is under our control, we can steal someone's commander, and they don't get a chance to put it back in the command zone because it hasn't changed zones. So Possession Engine gives us a lot of interesting options. I don't think maybe as many as the Mysterious Limousine, but it really does have a different way of, like, it plays similarly, but also differently. So it's kind of in the same space, but not entirely, and it's just a lot of fun to be able to play with it. So yeah. Next is Salvation Engine. This is an interesting one. This is 4 and a white for a 6/10 vehicle that crews for 6. So I think this may be, other than Shorikai, the only vehicle in the deck with a crew cost that Greasefang can't activate on her own. However, 6 is not that far out of our reach, especially when we have Shorikai, because 2 Kamigawa pilot tokens crew as though they were a total of crew 6. So yeah. Salvation Engine gives all other artifact creatures we control +2/+2. Very powerful effect. Turns all of our, 3 mana or 3 power vehicles into 5 power, which is a huge change. And whenever this attacks, we return up to 1 target artifact card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a great way for us to take advantage of what our deck is doing, which is putting vehicles in our graveyard, and then we get their enters triggers, or we get attack triggers from them if we have them in play. But in any case, being able to just have them in play without having to cast them cheats on mana with these expensive cards that we have. Salvation Engine, if we just discard this and discard anything else that's huge, we bring Salvation Engine back with Greasefang, crew it with Greasefang and something else, attack with it, and bring back a different artifact we have to get more value out of it as a blocker or on the next turn, since it's not going to have haste, since it didn't come back with Greasefang, unless it just inherently has haste. It's also possible that we can do something that isn't bringing back our vehicles, like a card that we sacrificed, or we're forced to sacrifice, or forced to discard that happens to be an artifact that isn't a vehicle. Even if it's something as small as a Wayfarer's Bauble, we activate that, get a little rampant growth, it goes to the graveyard, we attack with our Salvation Engine on the same or a later turn, and what the heck, we get back our Wayfarer's Bauble, so we get a little bit more ramp ready for us. Yeah, pretty good. Next we have Sky Sovereign, console flagship. Gotta run Sky Sovereign in your vehicle decks. This is a 6/5 legendary vehicle that costs 5 mana and flies. And it says when it enters or attacks, it does 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker that an opponent controls. So another one of these Titan triggers on enter or attack, and it crews for 3. So easy to crew, and if we're reanimating it with Greasefang, it's going to have haste. So we reanimate it with Greasefang, it enters, does 3 damage to a blocker, or, any creature we want to kill that's an X3 or less, and then we crew it and attack with it, and it gets that attack trigger, which is the same trigger again. So even if an opponent has a 6 toughness or less creature that is a blocker, we can kill it because we've got 2 triggers of this. Plus, we're then attacking with a 6/5 flyer. Yeah, hard to overstate how helpful this is, especially being able to bring it back over and over. Next up, we have a really weird one from the Doctor Who set. It's Cybership. This is 6 generic mana for an 8/8 flying vehicle that crews for 4. So this is an 8/8 that we can crew with Greasefang, and it flies. Eat your heart out, Shorikai. Not true, Shorikai is much better, but this is still a very cool card, and huge, easy to crew, evasive, love it. And it says, whenever this vehicle deals combat damage to a player, put the top 2 cards of that player's library onto the battlefield face down under your control. They are 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. So these are kind of weird. This is not us making tokens, even though it plays a little bit like it. We steal the top 2 cards of a player's library, which if they have, scryed or surveilled something to the top, if they've brainstormed to put something back on that they want, whatever it may be, we can muck up someone's draws this way. Especially if someone's got like a Courser of Crewfix and they're playing with the top card of their library revealed, we know what we can take with them. But then we just take those cards and put them face down, and they're 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. So they're just 2/2s for us. We don't have a serious form of flash in this, or a flicker in this deck, I should say. And even if we did, because the kind of flicker that we have is Mysterious Limousine, it comes back to the battlefield under its owner's control. So we don't want to flicker these Cybermen because those cards will re-enter under their owner's control, assuming that they were not instants or sorceries, which means they would go to exile and they'd be in exile forever. So we don't get to keep them, and we don't get to flip them. So what do we want them for? We want them for the fact that every time this does combat damage to a player, which is easy for it to do, we get 2 2/2s. And we've stolen something off the top of someone's library. It might be something that is detrimental to them to lose, but in any case, we suddenly have enough power to keep crewing the cyber ship, or crewing most anything else we have. It gives us enough power that, added to Greasefang's power, crews Shorikai. We've got lots of fun things we can do with these little 2/2s, and we get more of them populating our board every time the cyber ship does combat damage to a player. Last thing to note, Cybermen are artifact creatures, which means stuff like Brotherhood Vertibird cares about the number of artifacts we have, and these will count for that. Neat. Next up is the Pridwin Steel Flagship. This is from the Fallout Commander decks. 4 and double white for a 6/6 legendary vehicle with flying and crew 2. Crew 2 is relevant in this case. It says whenever another non-token artifact we control enters, doesn't matter if it was cast, every time we bring back one of our vehicles with Greasefang, this is going to trigger. Every time we cast a vehicle or any other artifact spell, if it resolves and hits the battlefield, this is going to trigger. What it does is it makes a 2/2 white human knight creature token that has its own triggered ability. This token gets, or I guess it's not a triggered ability, it's a static ability. It says it gets +2/+2 for as long as an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So essentially, the Pridwin, when it triggers, is going to make a 2/2 that's already got +2/+2. So it's a 4/4 until end of turn. And then every other turn, it'll only be a 4/4 if we have an artifact enter, but it is a 4/4 once we have an artifact enter. And when those artifacts are entering, if they're not tokens, we're making more 2/2s. Each of these 2/2s, even without getting a little stronger, can crew the Pridwin, which again is a 6/6 flyer. So this is a great source of tokens for us that can help us crew our things, but also just stand around and block, or even attack if we cast or have in any other way, like Greasefang's trigger, an artifact enter. So think about having 3 of these things in play. There's 3 little 2/2s. Greasefang triggers, brings back a vehicle, suddenly there's 3 4/4s, and we can attack with them in addition to that thing we brought back. Or we can use them to crew that thing, and use Greasefang to crew something else. Next is Demonic Junker. This is 6 and a black for a 4/3 artifact vehicle with crew 2 that has affinity for artifacts, meaning it costs 1 generic less to cast for each artifact that we control. So another thing like the Brotherhood Vertibird that gives us more value the more artifacts we have. It's great because this could be a 4/3 crew 2 vehicle for just a single black, as long as we have 6 other artifacts in play. And it says when it enters, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. And if a creature you controlled was destroyed this way, put 2 1/1 counters on the Junker. So this means every time this enters, when we cast it, or when we reanimate it with Greasefang, we get to blow up a creature on each player's playmat. We don't have to do any of them. It says up to 1 target creature for each player. So we can hit, just 1 of our opponents, 2 of our opponents, all 3 of our opponents, and no matter how many opponents or which ones we're hitting, we can hit ourselves as well. It could be one of the vehicles we've already got in play that we don't plan to attack with. We just want its enters trigger, so we put it back in the graveyard so that we can get it again next turn. Whatever the case may be, Demonic Junker gives us the ability to pump itself by putting something else in our graveyard. And then, if we're attacking with our now 6/5 vehicle, maybe it doesn't die, we bounce it back to our hand. Next turn, we reanimate whatever vehicle we killed, since we have to destroy a creature, so we just crew a vehicle before this enters. Now it's a creature, and we get to target it. We reanimate that vehicle next turn, and if it survives combat, it's adding to the discount that Demonic Junker gets from Affinity for Artifacts. Just a lot of fun in this deck, being able to loop it and continually destroy things. Next up, it's Rolling Hamsphere. This is from the Bloomborough Commander decks. This is 7 generic mana for a 4/4 vehicle that crews for 3 and gets +1/+1 for each hamster we control. Well, that's a lot of hamsters. It says when it attacks, we make 3 1/1 red hamster creature tokens. Then it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of hamsters we control. Now the Hamsphere, interestingly, is not a hamster, but it is 7 mana for a 4/4 that when we attack with it, it makes 3 hamsters, which gives it +1/+1, so it's actually a 7/7 that attacks as a 7/7, and also lightning bolts something. Any target, 3 damage, we get those 3 hamsters. But what if it survives combat, and we attack with it next turn? Well, now it's going to make 3 more hamsters, and if the first 3 still survived, this is now a 10/10 that zots something for 6 damage. What if this doesn't survive? We bring it back with Greasefang, and it gets to do it over and over and over and over. This is a really fun card to find if there's a way for us to tutor up a card, but just to mill it, and then suddenly we're attacking on like turn 4 with Greasefang, or rather turn 3. If this has gone to our graveyard before we get our Greasefang out, we just play Greasefang turn 3, bring back the Hamsphere, crew the Hamsphere, attack with it, lightning bolt something, get 3 1/1s, and we're attacking with a 7/7 on turn 3. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun. Also, what great art. Look at how happy these hamsters are. Next up is Valor's Flagship. This is a big thing from Aetherdrift. 4 and triple white for a 7/7 legendary vehicle with flying, first strike, and lifelink. And remember, if we brought it back with Greasefang, haste. So 7/7 flying, lifelinking, first striker, very strong. It crews for 3, and it has cycling for X, 2, and a white. Meaning we've got to pay at least 2 and a white and discard it from our hand to draw a card. That means it can put itself in the graveyard, gives us a card in the process, and it costs us 3 mana to do so. So 3 mana, putting this in the graveyard, drawing a card, going to combat, reanimating it with Greasefang, and swinging in the air for 7 lifelinking damage that first strikes. That's crazy. Surely there's nothing else to this. Oh, well, when we cycle it, we make a number of 1/1 pilot creature tokens that saddle mounts and crew vehicles as though their power were 2 greater. So even though this is technically an Aetherdrift pilot token, which can saddle mounts in addition, or so a pilot token that crews vehicles as though its power were 2 or greater, that's exactly what the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty tokens do. These tokens that we make here can also saddle mounts as though their power were 2 or greater, but because in our deck we don't have any mounts, unless we're planning somehow to steal a mount from an opponent, these might as well be the same kind of token that we're making with Shorikai and any of our other things, like Prodigy's Prototype, that make the Kamigawa pilots. So just so you know, these are slightly different, but they work in our deck basically the same. So Valor's Flagship lets us spend 3 mana to put it in the graveyard and draw a card so that we can immediately reanimate it with Greasefang that same turn. But if we want to spend more than 3 mana, every additional mana we spend makes us a pilot. So that's terrific. Even one of those is enough that if we reanimate this with Greasefang, that pilot can then crew Valor's Flagship. So spending 4 mana to make a 1/1 and to draw a card, and then we reanimate Valor's Flagship, use that 1/1 to crew it, attack with it in the air, and Greasefang didn't even have to tap. At least for this. Maybe she's crewing something else. Very powerful. But is it as powerful as Parhelion 2? This is... The pairing of Greasefang and Parhelion 2 was a thing back on Arena when Greasefang was first launched. It's still a thing in Pioneer. For everyone who's playing Pioneer, I salute you. Keep playing. It's a great format. It just needs more love. And yeah, this is just the biggest hit you can get, and it's delightful when you do. Parhelion 2 is 6 and double white for a 5/5 legendary vehicle with flying, first strike, and vigilance. Not lifelink, but it does have vigilance. And it crews for 4, perfect for Greasefang. And it says, when Parhelion 2 attacks, make 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance that are attacking. Remember, it doesn't say tapped and attacking because they have vigilance. So we get 2 Sarah Angels that are also attacking in addition to Parhelion 2. Just very strong. If there's a way for you to get Parhelion 2 in the graveyard, you should do it. Get Greasefang out, go to combat, reanimate this, crew it with Greasefang, and swing in for 13 in the air. all of which is Vigilant. You will have to bounce Parhelion 2 at the end of that turn, but that's okay, because you get to keep those angels. Parhelion 2, I say you'll have to bounce it, because I'm assuming it's not been removed as a 5/5 flyer with First Strike. But if it does get removed, that's even better for you. You just pull it back out of the graveyard with Greasefang and do it again next turn. And if it's not removed, you've still got those angels and any other of your vehicles that are in the graveyard that you want to bring back with Greasefang. Or you use an effect that lets you draw discard, or draw a lot so that you can go to cleanup and discard, and you can put Parhelion 2 back in the graveyard. And that covers our entire vehicles section. Hey, do you feel like liking the video maybe? Nice. I'm kidding. Yeah, I appreciate you watching either way. Like it if you or don't, but I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you. Anyway, let's keep going. We've covered the core of our game plan. So let's talk about these support sections for our game plan, starting with our card advantage section, which as usual I have tagged as draw. It doesn't mean that all of these cards do the draw card action. It just gives us a little bit more access to some cards. So we're going to start first with Basim ibn Ishaq. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. I'm not an Assassin's Creed guy. But this is a cool card. It's a blue and a black for a 2/2 legendary human assassin. Remember, legendary, so Basim is historic. And says, whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Basim can't be blocked this turn, and this only triggers once each turn. So, only once each turn when we cast a historic spell. It's not when we have a historic permanent interplay, like with Greasefang's trigger. But still, we've got, again, 50 some odd different historic cards. As long as we're casting them, Basim is going to trigger, drawing us a card, replacing that card that we cast in our hand, and Basim can't be blocked this turn, which is pretty good too. We can use Basim to crew our things, and he's going to get bigger, because when he deals combat damage to a player, we put a 1/1 counter on him. That's terrific. It means that we are able to use Basim to draw cards and just to attack rather than crewing things. Although we can crew things with him if we want, but we would like to be able to just draw cards and attack with him so he gets bigger, so he can crew bigger and bigger things. So he becomes more valuable as the game goes on, but only a little bit. He's not so valuable that he's like removal bait for our opponents, but he's still giving us a lot of value. I just think this is really great card design. Next we have Deadly Dispute. Love this card. 1 and a black for an instant that says, as an additional cost, sack an artifact or creature. Doesn't even require us to have crewed our vehicle in order to sacrifice it. We can just sacrifice one of our artifacts, which is maybe a vehicle that we like, our Surge Hacker mech. We reanimate it with Greasefang. It does combat damage to something, but we don't want to tap down our creatures like Greasefang to crew it, because maybe we want to keep them untapped so we can crew blockers on an opponent's turn. But we still got the interest trigger from the Surge Hacker. So then we Deadly Dispute it to sacrifice it, and then we draw 2 cards and make a treasure. So pretty great. This, as a sacrifice outlet, just works for us so well in this deck. Next is Key to the City. This is truly an incredibly powerful card in our deck. 2 generic mana gives us an artifact that if we tap it and discard a card, which we want to do to get things in the graveyard for Greasefang anyway, then up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. That's crazy. We bring something back with Greasefang. We crew it with Greasefang. We then throw away a different good vehicle that we want to have in our graveyard, and we make that creature unblockable. That vehicle unblockable. Then it goes to our hand, and that can be the thing that we discard next turn. Or alternatively, we bring something back with Greasefang, we attack with it, let's say it survives, and we get to the end step, and we just bounce it back to our hand thanks to Greasefang's delayed trigger. But we still have priority in our end step. So we choose at that moment to tap Key to the City, discard our vehicle, and then give something unblockable during our end step, which is not relevant, but it was a free way to put something from our hand into our graveyard. And that's terrific. We're going to be able to reanimate it with Greasefang next turn, and this will be untapped next turn so that we can make something else unblockable too. Or, even more fun, we can use this politically. We can say, okay, the vehicle that we attacked with is bouncing to our hand at the end of our turn. Then on a different player's turn, we say, hey, opponent A, I know you want to attack opponent B, but you don't want them to block you. What if we were to use our key to the city to make your creature unblockable? Would you attack them then? They're probably going to say, yeah, what do you want for it? And we'll say, oh, just leave us alone for a turn cycle or two. Or give us this value that you have on some of your other things. Cast your secret rendezvous that we know you have, and we get to draw the cards. They would say, oh, that sounds great. I'll make the deal. Go ahead and activate your key to the city and make my creature unblockable. And we'll say, no. You have to attack with your creature first, because if we make your creature unblockable, you could attack us with it. And they'll say, okay, that's fair. We're trusting each other. I will declare an attack first. And we'll say, great. We discard this card that everyone at the table knew we already had because we bounced it to our hand with Greasefang on our last turn. They know we want it in the graveyard, so this helps us too. And we make their creature unblockable. And now we are using resources that we already wanted to use, like putting a card in our graveyard. And we're using an opponent's resources, not just their creature, but their turn, their attack step, to do damage to a different one of our opponents. And we're probably getting value out of it from whatever we got from the deal we made with opponent A. So all of that is powerful. But what if opponent A is like, I'm just going to attack opponent B. This is before we've made any kind of deal with them. They attack opponent B, and we're like, they've got a pretty big creature. They can do a lot of damage to opponent B if they don't get blocked. So we say, hey, I have effects during y'all's combat. Before blocks, I'm going to activate Key to the City and discard this card in order to make opponent A's big attacker unblockable. That is us still using opponent A's resources, and the resources that we were going to use anyway, to create damage that's going to a different opponent, our opponent B. But we didn't have to make a deal in the process. Which means this is something that is what opponent A wanted to do anyway, and what opponent B didn't want to happen, but we didn't talk to anyone about it, which means although we get less value from the potential of the deal, we get so much more fun value because no one expects when it happens. I mean, maybe this happens at your tables, but most of the tables I play at, when you see one person attacking another person, the other two players at the table sort of treat that combat like, oh, that's y'all's deal, we're gonna just watch. But if you have someone jump in and contribute to it, especially when it's contributing by making an attacker unblockable, that is so much fun. It's a really memorable moment at the table, and it still gives us all the value of letting opponent A's attacker, which is now tapped probably, so it's not gonna block us, do damage to opponent B, who is also our opponent. Just very powerful. So much we can do with Key to the City, and as you've noticed, I haven't even gotten to the second line of text. It says whenever this artifact becomes untapped, if you pay 2 mana, you can draw a card. So usually, this comes into play less often than this. There are plenty of times when I've used Key to the City to just discard a card and maybe make something unblockable. And even when it untaps, I don't always have the 2 mana that I want to pay to draw a card, but having the access to 2 extra mana every turn, basically every turn to get extra card, it's like getting a free clue every turn. I just have to spend that mana during my upkeep step, because once this becomes untapped, that trigger is going to go on the stack at the start of upkeep. So yeah, Key to the City, extremely good in our deck. Everything it does is what we want it to do. Yeah, love this card. Next we have Oswald Fiddlebender from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. This is 1 and a white for a 2/2 legendary gnome artificer with magical tinkering. If we pay a white mana and tap Oswald Fiddlebender and sacrifice an artifact, we get to search our library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value, put that on the battlefield, and then shuffle, but only as a sorcery. So imagine this. Imagine Oswald's in play, and we use Greasefang to reanimate Valor's flagship. We get a 7/7 flying, first striking, life-linking vehicle, which we crew with Greasefang, and we attack in. We do 7 damage, we gain 7 life. And then, post-combat, we activate Oswald, and we spend a white mana, tap Oswald, and sacrifice Valor's flagship to put it back in the graveyard so that we can bring it back again next turn if we want to. And Valor's flagship costs 7 mana, so we get to go find an 8 mana card. As long as it's an artifact that we find, we can put it in play right away. Parhelion 2 is 8 mana. So we attacked using Greasefang's triggered ability and crewing with her for 7 lifelinking first striking damage in the air, put that card back in the graveyard, and got Parhelion 2 into play so that we're ready to attack with that next turn. Or just crew it if we have creatures we can crew it this turn, during, or on our opponent's turns rather, and block with it. It's still a 5/5 flyer, so yeah. Being able to use Oswald Fiddlebender as a birthing pod effect in this deck, it's so satisfying because we want to put our artifacts back in the graveyard anyway, so we just go to our second main phase, and whatever we reanimated with Greasefang, if it's still in play at the end of combat, now it's back in our graveyard, and we have something else in play that we don't get bounced to our hand, the way that card that we brought back with Greasefang would have. So Oswald is very good. I will say this. When I play cards like Oswald Fiddlebender or Neoform or Repurposing Bay, cards like that, I like to make sure I have a deck list available to me on my phone or, on a little slip of paper or something that I've brought with me that I keep in my deck box, whatever it may be, that I'm able to sort by mana value. Or if you just have this Moxfield list up, you can go down to the graph of the curve at the bottom and click on any one of the columns and see what's in it. That way, when you activate Oswald, or when you're preparing for your turn where you think you're going to activate Oswald, what it is you can get if you sacrifice any particular one of your artifacts. You don't want to be in a situation, and this is fine, honestly, but Commander is already a long game. You don't want to be in a situation where you say, all right, I have my Surge Hacker mech that I'm going to sacrifice. Now I need to find a vehicle or some other artifact that has mana value 1 higher than this thing. I don't know what I'm looking for. So you're just sorting through your deck, and you have to go through every card in your deck and pull out every card that counts for it, or put it on top or whatever, and then, decide amongst those. It's better if you think you're going to be using Oswald Fiddlebender to be prepared and know what you're going to get. Even if you're down to between 2 things, because maybe, once you get to your turn and combat happens, you don't know how things are going to go. But at least you've done the due diligence of getting ready for it. I think that birthing pod type effects like that require, or not maybe require, but are benefited by having a little courtesy at the table and being ready and knowing what you want to get. And I'm saying all this assuming you're one of those players that hasn't just memorized their deck. So maybe you don't need the having your phone out to look at it or looking at a little slip of paper. But yeah, just my suggestion for how you play these kinds of effects. It can really be helpful at the table. Plus, Oswald is a 2/2 for 2 that you can use to crew things if you want. Next up is the Reckoner Bankbuster. We've already seen it. We can use it to essentially treat it like a repeatable clue and draw cards from it. Smuggler's Copter does leave us hand neutral because we draw and then discard with it. But remember, discard in our deck is good, so this is giving us a card draw, and we're probably going to be able to use it. Ballad of the Black Flag is our 1 saga in the deck, and it's really cool. This is another Assassin's Creed card. This is it's 1 and double blue for a saga. If you haven't seen sagas before, the way it works is when it enters and at the start of your first main phase on every subsequent turn, you put a lore counter on it. And then you trigger the ability with a number associated with it equal to the number of lore counters. And once its last ability has resolved, you sacrifice the saga. It goes to the graveyard. So with Ballad of the Black Flag, when it first comes in and the next 2 turns, its first 3 chapter abilities are all mill 3 cards, and you may put a historic card from among them into your hand. So this is pretty similar to some effects we've seen before. It is slipping my mind exactly which card mills us and lets us grab those cards back, but also the Weatherlight lets us look at the top 5 and put a historic into our hand, so kind of similar either way. Remember, most of the cards in our deck are historic, including Ballad of the Black Flag, but if we only have 53 cards in our deck that are historic, let's say that's the number, obviously Ballad of the Black Flag is not going to find itself or either of our commanders since they won't be in the deck, which means 50 cards out of the 97 that remain are historic. So it's pretty likely we're going to find something, and if we don't, that's okay. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. Even just milling 3 can be helpful to us. Now, typically, it may be the case that if we mill 3, we do see some historic cards in there, but they're all vehicles, and we don't want to put them in our hand, or we don't want to put all of them in our hand. So that mill helps us either way. In general, though, Battle of the Black Flag, since we're milling and getting to put a card that's from the majority of the cards in our deck among those into our hand, or from among those into our hand, this is kind of draw 1, mill 2, or look at the top 3, put it in your hand, and put the other 2 in your graveyard. What is that, strategic planning? That may be wrong. But yeah, just powerful for us. And its 4th chapter ability, historic spells you cast this turn cost 2 generic less to cast. That's amazing. That can mean, especially for all of our vehicles that cost a lot or are just completely colorless, this can be a 2-mana discount on 2 spells, 3 spells, 4 spells that we're casting that turn, which means we've gotten an extra 4 mana, 6 mana, 8 mana. Even if we're essentially getting just 2 extra mana, that's not bad. Next we have Braid's Arisen Nightmare. This is 2 and double black for a 3/3 legendary nightmare from Dominaria United that says, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent of their choice that shares a type with it, a card type with it, and for each opponent who doesn't, they lose 2 and you draw a card. So let's examine this. At the end step, that's when Greasefang would bounce the vehicle that she reanimated for us back to our hand, assuming it's still in the battlefield. That creature, or that vehicle, is an artifact, whether or not we've crewed it and made it a creature as well. But in any case, we get to take one of those, or an enchantment we have, which the only one we have is Battle of the Black Flag. Probably don't want to get rid of that, but you never know. Or a land that we have, or a planeswalker. We are running one planeswalker. Sometimes we've got enough land and we don't mind sacrificing one of those. But it gives our opponents the choice. At the very least, though, we're looking to get rid of the thing that we would have to bounce to our hand if we let Greasefang's instep trigger resolve. So we let Braid's trigger resolve first, is how we do this. Let's say we sacrifice that artifact. If we do, each opponent may sacrifice an artifact, or some other permanent that is an artifact because it shares the artifact type, assuming we've done that. If the artifact that we are sacrificing is a vehicle we crewed, it has the creature type during the step, so they could sacrifice a creature as well. That's how it works. As long as it shares a type with the permanent we're sacrificing. Each opponent can do that. Yeah, it gets rid of something of theirs. And that's each opponent. And anyone who doesn't want to, maybe because we sacrificed a land, or maybe because they don't have one. If we sacrifice an artifact and they don't have any artifacts, they don't get to choose to sacrifice an artifact they don't have. So if they don't do that, they'll lose 2 life and we draw a card. This can become, at your end step, sacrifice something and draw 3 cards, and each opponent loses 2 life. That's great. Braids gives us repeated value every turn, gives us an outlet to sacrifice our vehicles that we've brought back with Greasefang, and burns our opponents a little bit and removes their stuff. Really very nice. Next up, we have Psy Master Thopterist. This is 2 and a blue for a 1/4 legendary human artificer. Again, legendary, so historic. Braids is also legendary. That says whenever you cast an artifact spell, make a 1/1 Thopter. Just get a flyer that's a colorless artifact creature. Crazy. Every time we cast an artifact spell. Now this is cast. It doesn't count when we have our vehicles re-enter from Greasefang's trigger, but we're going to be casting quite a few artifacts in this deck. Even if this is just get an extra 1/1 flyer every turn, that's not nothing. We can use those to block, we can use those to crew, we can swing in with those, and Muyanling is going to care about them attacking in and doing combat damage to a player because she'll let us draw cards off of it. We can also use Psy as a sacrifice outlet. For 1 and a blue and sack 2 artifacts, we draw a card. So a little expensive, but we are making a bunch of artifact tokens. If we need to sacrifice those and turn them into card draw, we've got the option. Next is Uthros Researchcraft. This is from Edge of Eternity's Commander, and it's great. This is 2 and a blue for a 0/8 spacecraft. So it's not actually a 0/8 at first. It's a spacecraft that has the station ability, which means when this first enters, it has nothing on it other than the station ability. It doesn't even have a power and toughness. Station means at sorcery speed, we can tap a creature we control to put charge counters equal to that creature's power on the Researchcraft. We only do that as a sorcery, and it doesn't become an artifact creature until there are 12 or more counters on it. So a way to do this in this deck is, obviously, we can just use our creatures to station this as though we were crewing just at sorcery speed each time. But we can also, let's say we have that Surge Hacker mech re-enter the battlefield thanks to Greasefang, and we don't want to attack with it in that same scenario I gave earlier. Surge Hacker mech has a power of 5, so we just go to our second main phase, and at sorcery speed, tap it to station the Researchcraft, and now we've put 5 counters on our Researchcraft. Great. We have so many big vehicles, some of which have vigilance, so we're able to attack with them and then use them to station the research craft by using some of our creatures to crew our vehicles and then using the vehicles to station the craft. That gets us more value out of those creatures than what their power would normally suggest. It's pretty sweet. The research craft, once it has at least 3 counters on it, has this ability. It's still not a creature at this point, but it says whenever we cast an artifact spell, we draw a card, and we put a charge counter on the spacecraft. So as long as we can play the research craft and immediately station it up to 3, even if that looks like, okay, well, you know, it's we've played this on turn 4 after playing Greasefang on turn 3, and we just don't have a vehicle in play yet or in our graveyard, we'll just use Greasefang to put this at 4 charge counters right away. And now it has a triggered ability. On our next turn, we cast an artifact, which will trigger the craft, drawing us a card to replace the artifact in our hand and putting a charge counter on it. So now it's at 5 charge counters, and we're getting closer and closer. And once the craft gets it to 12 charge counters, which seems like a lot, but remember, we have big ways that we can station this thanks to our vehicles, but also we're going to be casting a lot of artifacts, so it's going to get a counter from each of those. Once it gets up to 12, it finally is a 0/8 creature that gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control, including itself, so it's at least a 1/8. Very, very good as a blocker. It doesn't need to be crewed, it just stays an artifact creature as long as it has at least 12 charge counters on it, and it retains this ability to draw us cards when we cast artifact spells. And it does still put charge counters on itself. It's worth tracking, even though, you know, at that point, unless someone has something that can get rid of those charge counters, it's not going to matter. It's going to remain a creature. But still worth tracking just in case they have something like that. You never know who's going to have Glissa. So next up, we've seen the Conqueror's Galleon. On the backside, it can draw us a card or draw us a card and discard a card. Crystal Skull Isu's Spyglass is another Assassin's Creed card. This is 2 and double blue for a legendary artifact. It's historic in both ways. That lets us look at the top card of our library at any time and lets us play historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of our library. So very, very nice for us. We don't have, I don't think, any historic lands in this deck. I was just trying to keep the budget for the deck down, but you sure could put some artifact lands in this, and that would be fine. There's a little bit of synergy to not having them. I did consider them, but yeah, there's good reasons why you might do either one. However, again, if there's 53 spells in this deck that are historic, then that means there's 50 spells in the deck that the Crystal Skull can see on the top and can help us cast. Being able to see the top card of our library and cast things off of it is card advantage. Plus, this is a mana rock. It taps for blue mana. Blue mana is great because we have, of all of our blue cards, this is one of the 5 blue cards that require double blue. So having a rock that only taps for blue, we've got plenty of cards that don't require colored mana at all, so this helps for those. But any one of our ones that requires blue, especially double blue, having the Spyglass tap for it is great for us. Next up, we've seen Moo. She gives us card draw when we have one or more creatures do combat damage to a player if they are flyers. Ribskiff draws us a card when it enters. The Indomitable is Coastal Piracy, giving all of our creatures curiosity. Whenever they do combat damage to a player, we draw a card. The Weatherlight, when it does combat damage to a player, lets us look at the top 5 and put a historic card from among them into our hand. Foreboding Steamboat gives us card advantage because it investigates when it attacks, and we put one of the cards that was exiled with it into its owner's graveyard. Mole Module lets us mill 4 cards and put a permanent from among them onto the battlefield. That's what I was thinking of before. Valor's Flagship can be cycled, which could put a card in our hand. And we have not yet seen the Mightstone and Weakstone. This is 5 generic mana for a legendary artifact, Power Stone. We'll talk about Power Stones in a moment. And it says, when the Mightstone and Weakstone enters, choose to either draw 2 cards or give target creature -5/-5 until end of turn. So a sweet removal effect or divination. That's pretty great. We can also use the Mightstone and Weakstone by tapping it for 2 colorless mana that can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. This is the Power Stone clause. It means there are 3 things we can use these 2 generic mana, or these 2 colorless mana, for. One is activating abilities. If we have an ability that requires mana to activate, For example, Foreboding Steamboat makes clues. They cost 2 mana to activate. So yeah, that seems like something we could use that mana for. Sigh requires 1 and a blue. We could spend our 2 colorless mana, one of them, on that, and a blue from somewhere else. So Mightstone and Weakstone's Power Stone mana can be used to pay, to activate abilities. It can also be used to pay costs. For example, if someone has a Smothering Tithe in play, good grief. I'm not making fun of them, that's my favorite card in Magic, but good grief. If you draw a card and they say, do you pay the 2? Well, you can use the Mightstone and Weakstone's Power Stone mana to pay that 2. This is for costs like Rhystic Study or any other costs that might come up, like Ghostly Prison, that sort of deal. Finally, you can use this mana to cast spells as long as those are artifact spells. It can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells, but it can be spent to cast artifact spells. And remember, we have 40 other artifacts in this deck besides the Mightstone and Weakstone, including one of our commanders as an artifact. So the Mightstone and Weakstone can be used to cast artifact spells, pay costs, or activate abilities that require mana. Those are all the things that Power Stone mana is used for, but it's best summed up with just this sentence. It just sounds a little weird if you haven't heard it before. It can also do something else that's pretty cool, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So that is our card advantage section. Let's talk now about acceleration, which again I've just shorthanded as ramp. So of course we're running Soul Ring. It's 1 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana, so it's like a better Mightstone and Weakstone, because it doesn't have the Power Stone clause. It's very powerful. This is Commander, run a Soul Ring. We've also got Wayfarer's Bauble, as I mentioned earlier. For 1 generic mana, we have an artifact that if we pay 2, tap, and sack it, we can Rampant Growth. Search our library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Again, we can use the Mightstone and Weakstone's Power Stone mana to activate this ability. Pretty great. And we can bring this back with our Salvation Engine, like I mentioned earlier, and do it again and keep getting more Rampant Growths in our Esper deck. We're also running Arcane Signet, of course. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps to add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, or our commander's color identity. So in this deck, white, black, and blue, or white, blue, and black, whichever way you want to look at it. A 2 mana untapped rock that makes all 3 of our colors. Of course, we're running this. We've seen Deadly Dispute. It makes a treasure when we use it. That is acceleration, even if it's temporary. We have another 2 mana untapped rock in Fellwar Stone. This is an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. That means if any opponent is running something other than red or green, then they're making at least one of our colors, and this comes in untapped and can tap for that, as long as they have, lands that produce those colors. It's great if we see someone who's playing white in Commander, which is not unlikely. If they're playing white and blue, if one person's playing white and one person's playing black, then we've got lots of different ways to make our mana. In addition, if someone's running something like Chromatic Lantern that gives all their lands the ability to tap for any color, so too can Fellwar Stone tap for any color at that point. So yeah, this is really helpful for our acceleration. We've seen the Bankbuster. It takes a while, but if we can get it to happen, it can make a treasure in addition to a pilot. Cultivator's Caravan is a manalith, so it can tap for 1 mana of any color. Conqueror's Galleon is easy to flip into a land, so that's not part of our land base, but it adds to us in terms of acceleration. Crystal Skull is a mana rock for blue mana. Next we have King Makar, the Gold Cursed. This is 2 and double black for a 2/3 legendary human noble, who is King Midas from Journey into Nyx. He has an inspired ability. Whenever King Makar becomes untapped, you may exile target creature, and if you do, you make a gold token. A gold token is a treasure token that you don't have to tap. You just sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color. So King Makar exiles creatures. This is just an unconditional exile effect for a creature. It doesn't even have to be an opponent's creature, but it usually will be, because they usually have creatures. This is not like an Oblivion Ring. They don't come back, they're just exiled. And when we do that, we get a gold token. But King Makar has to become untapped for all this to happen. So how do we make sure we untap with him? We use him to crew. We have so many vehicles, King Makar is here to be a pilot for our vehicles, and then, during our untap step, we exile the scariest thing that we don't control, the scariest creature on the battlefield, and we get ramp in addition to it. We get a gold token, and we just do that every turn. King Makar is so unassuming as a little 2/3 that only does things for us during our upkeep and then just is a pilot for us, but can really be removal bait for our opponents, which is great. We would love to have some of that because we don't want them to kill Greasefang. So King Makar gives us a lot of value repeatedly over and over, and these gold tokens are kind of the smallest amount of it. We've seen the Regalia. It lets us essentially cascade into a land and put it on the battlefield tapped when it attacks. We've seen the Mole module. It can mill 4 and put a permanent from among them onto the battlefield, which can include one of our many lands, so that is acceleration. And the Mightstone and Weakstone, we've already seen, makes Power Stone mana when we tap it. We have not seen Thousand Moons Smithy. This is 2 and double white for a legendary artifact that says when it enters, we make a white gnome soldier artifact creature token that has power and toughness, each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures that we control. So we add them all up, and we've got a token that includes itself in that calculus because it is a creature and an artifact, of course. So it's at least a 1/1, but it's at least a 2/2 really because the Thousand Moon Smithy came in and it's also an artifact. So we get, for 4 mana, we get this artifact that makes a 2/2. Or something much bigger, probably much bigger for us. So that's great for us to crew with, or station with, or just attack and defend with, because it's going to be a big, big gnome. And then at the beginning of our first main phase, we can tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures we control to transform Thousand Moon Smithy. That includes the gnome we made, and the smithy itself if we want, because it is itself an artifact. This is not hard to get to, but we usually want to be able to do this without tapping the smithy itself. It's fine if we do tap it, but if we can do this without tapping the smithy, we are transforming it into a land. So if we tapped the smithy, it's going to transform and be tapped. But if we didn't tap it, it's going to transform and be untapped, and we can tap it for white mana. Notably, this is Barracks of the Thousand, a legendary artifact land. This is still an artifact, so it still counts toward our artifact count for things like Brotherhood Vertibird. And for these gnomes, even though it's a land, it's an artifact as well, so we get to use it to add into those gnomes' power and toughness. In addition, whenever we cast an artifact or creature spell using mana produced by Barracks of the Thousand, we make another one of those gnome soldiers with power and toughness each equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures we control. So that count just gets bigger. The number of creatures, the number of artifacts, and it cares about Barracks of the Thousand itself still being an artifact as well. So we use this, for 4 mana, we get a creature and the ability to flip this over soon to get a little bit of acceleration in the form of its mana, and as long as we use that mana on artifacts and creatures, we make an extra creature every time, and a creature that's getting bigger all the time. That covers our acceleration section, but we have a few discounts as well. These are all cards that decrease the cost of the spells that we're casting. We've already seen Battle of the Black Flag's last chapter ability, giving us 2 generic mana discount on all of our historic spells that we cast until end of turn. We're going to talk next about Joyrus Familiar. This is 4 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature, bird, so it is historic. It has flying, because it's a bird, and it gives our historic spells a discount of a single generic mana. So all of the time, we have all of our artifacts, all of our legends, and our one saga. There is only one card in this deck, I believe, that is historic, that does not have any generic mana costs in its casting cost. So again, that's more than 50 cards that we're able to get a discount from with Joyrus Familiar. I don't typically run effects like this that give us a discount unless I have at least 40 hits for it. We've got over 50 in this deck. So yeah, Familiar is great for us. But we also have Urza Lord Protector. 1, a white and a blue, for a 2/4 legendary human artificer that says artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast. So we've got 41 artifacts, it says here, and then 2 sorceries and 4 instants. So that's 47 cards. That seems pretty solid to me. That includes our artifact creatures. So therefore, all of our, not just our vehicles, but our artifact creatures, like Joyrus Familiar that we just saw. So Urza as a 2/4 for 3 that gives us a sweet discount that's constant, that's very powerful. But that's not the end of Urza's deal, because we saw a little preview of this earlier with the Mightstone and Weakstone. Urza says for 7 generic mana, if we both own and control Urza Lord Protector and an artifact named the Mightstone and Weakstone, we exile them both and meld them into Urza Planeswalker at sorcery speed. What that means is the back of this card is the half, it's the top half of a bigger creature. The back of the Mightstone and Weakstone is the other half, the bottom half. So we take them out of their sleeves, we flip them over, and we get this massive melded permanent in play, which is Urza Planeswalker, which is a 7 loyalty Planeswalker that says you may activate the loyalty abilities of Urza Planeswalker twice each turn rather than only once. And that's already super strong with 7 loyalty to begin with. It has 5 abilities. We can +2 it to give artifact, instant, and sorcery spells we cast this turn a discount of 2 generic mana, and we gain 2 life. So we can do that twice if we want, making each of our artifacts, instants, and sorceries that we cast this turn cost 4 generic less. We're not going to do that. That's crazy, but we sure could, and it's nice to think about. We can +1 Urza to draw 2 cards and then discard a card. A little bit of Shorikai vibes there, helps us both ways. We can 0 Urza to make 2 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. Notably, these are 2 1/1 soldiers that are artifact creatures, so that adds to our artifact count. We can -3 Urza to exile a non-land permanent, just unconditional exile as long as it's not a land, which I guess is a condition, but you get it. Or if someone at the table is crazy enough to let us get Urza Planeswalker to 10 loyalty, we can -10 him, and artifacts and planeswalkers we control gain indestructible until end of turn, and we destroy all non-land permanents. It's true that kills Greasefang, but at that point, it's fine. We've got so much value. I have not tagged Urza Lord Protector with any of these effects because the likelihood you're going to find both it and the Mightstone and Weakstone and be able to meld them is pretty low. But think of all the great things you can do. If you can get off a meld permanent in Commander, it always feels amazing. And remember, this is 7 generic mana to activate Urza. We can use the Mightstone and Weakstone's Power Stone mana in order to pay that cost because it's activating an ability. So we only just need 5 more mana, which we will have since that's what it cost to cast the Mightstone and Weakstone. Of course, we may have cast it for 4 thanks to this discount, but yeah, you get it. The idea that you may have in hand a white source, a blue source, 2 other mana, Urza Lord Protector, and the Mightstone and Weakstone in your opening hand, like the thought that, you can get Urza Planeswalker into play on turn 5 is crazy. But it's a possibility. It's worth delaying your commanders for, I guess. Anyway, that's crazy. And that is our discount section. Let's talk now about our interaction section, which again I've just shorthanded as removal. So we're running Dispatch. This is a single white mana for an instant that taps a creature. Normally I would consider an effect that taps something to be an evasion effect because it just, it might mess someone up with their activated abilities, but really we're just tapping something down so we can sneak past it. However, Dispatch has Metalcraft. If we control 3 or more artifacts, exile that creature. It doesn't even say instead. We are tapping it, which might be relevant, and then we're exiling it. So as long as we have 3 or more artifacts in play, this is 1 mana for an instant exile effect for a creature, which is extremely powerful, and I know that because the next 2 cards also do that. As I often say, Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are both pretty similar. They're both a single white mana for an instant that exiles a target creature and gives that creature's controller a little bit of a kickback. Swords to Plowshares gives that creature's controller life equal to that creature's power, and Path to Exile lets that creature's controller rampant growth. Search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So while these are both unconditional, instant speed, inexpensive creature removal, they both give our opponent something in return, but it's usually worth it. Like life or a tapped land, totally fine if that's what they're going to have. Dispatch sort of joins their ranks in this deck, since we have so many artifacts. Next we have Rite of Oblivion. This is a white and a black for a sorcery that, as an additional cost, we have to sacrifice a non-land permanent. This is another way for us to sacrifice those vehicles that Greasefang has brought back from the graveyard, assuming they survived combat. And then we get to exile a non-land permanent. Just 2 mana to exile something straight up, that seems very good, and it puts something back in our graveyard that we want there. We can also use Rite of Oblivion from our graveyard itself by flashing it back for 2, a white and a black. So this is great. If this happens to have been cast and we want to do it again, we can do it again. If we milled this, well, it's in our graveyard. We at least get to cast it once by flashing it back, and that's pretty solid. We've seen Braids. Braids can have our opponent sacrifice things. We don't have control over whether or not they do or what they choose to sacrifice in terms of the if they have multiple options. But if we see an opponent has only one artifact and we sacrifice an artifact, then they've either got to sacrifice that artifact or give us a card to lose 2 life. King Makar can let us exile a target creature every time he untaps, and we get to make a gold in addition. Surge Hacker Mech, when it enters, does damage equal to twice the number of vehicles we control to a creature or planeswalker. Fire Nation Drill enters, and we can tap it to destroy a creature power 4 or less. We've got the Foreboding Steamboat, which we've talked about how it works. We get rid of 2 creatures, and as long as this then attacks, one of those creatures is going to go to the graveyard. Mysterious Limousine, even more complicated way of O-ringing something and then O-ringing something else. Possession Engine does not really remove a creature from play, but it does remove it from the control of the player who has it, as long as this is in play, so pretty close. Sky Sovereign enters and attacks. It does 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. The Might Center Weakstone enters and does -5/-5 to a creature if we choose that mode. Demonic Junker can have us destroy up to 1 target creature that each player controls when it enters, and Rolling Hamsphere burns any target for an amount equal to the number of hamsters that we control every time it attacks after making 3 hamsters. So that covers our removal section. Our interaction section, I should say. And now let's talk about our Wraths. We've got 2 of them in the deck. We're running Citywide Bust. This is 1 and double white for a sorcery that destroys all creatures toughness 4 or greater. That can sure hit some of our creatures, it's true. But it hits all of the most defensive creatures that our opponents have, and it sure doesn't hit Greasefang, because Greasefang is a 4/3. So I like being able to use these sort of narrower Wraths in decks, because they're pretty fun. This also does dodge a lot of our creatures that have toughness 4 or greater, because most of the time those creatures aren't creatures, they're vehicles that we haven't crewed yet. So Citywide Busting before combat, then using Greasefang, who survived, to reanimate something that has a toughness of 4, yeah, seems pretty good. We're also running the Eternal Wanderer. This is 4 and double white for a legendary planeswalker with no subtype, because the Wanderer, her name is unknown. She's a 5 loyalty planeswalker with the static ability, no more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. So if we've got at least 1 blocker, great. That's all we need in order to protect the Eternal Wanderer, assuming the attacker doesn't have trample or something. Or any kind of other evasion, I guess. Yeah. If we +1 her, we can exile up to 1 target artifact or creature and then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. So it turns out we do have some flicker in this deck. And if we want to blink some of our things, we sure can. This is a really nice effect in this deck, because not only can we use it to rebuy our interest triggers, we can reanimate a vehicle with Greasefang, whether or not it has interest triggers, and whether or not we attack with it. During our second main phase, we can use the Eternal Wanderer to flicker it, and now it won't bounce to our hand because it's left the battlefield and then returned, so it's now a new game object. And that delayed trigger from Greasefang, bringing it back from the graveyard, will not put it back in our hand, since that delayed trigger cannot find the game object that vehicle once was. It's a new object now. Plus, of course, this can help us with our creatures or any of our other things that may have like a negative effect on them. Like if somebody puts a pacifism effect on Greasefang that also prevents her activated abilities from being activated, that doesn't really matter because her ability is triggered. But yeah, if it says that it can't be used to activate abilities or something, if somebody has locked down one of our vehicles so that it can't be activated, its activated abilities can't be activated, that sort of thing, then we've got that too. Just clear things off. Or we just have like -1/-1 counters we want to get rid of. This +1 ability does a lot for us. It's the Wanderer's 0 ability just makes a 2/2 white samurai creature token with double strike. 2/2 double strike for no cost, positive or negative, of loyalty is pretty sweet. It's a good attacker, it's a good blocker, it crews things well. Yeah, we like that. And the board wipe is -4, and for each player we choose a creature they control, and they sacrifice all creatures they control not chosen this way. So this is including us. It's for each player. So that means us too. So we can sacrifice every one of our creatures except for, let's say, Greasefang, which means either we sacrifice everything but Greasefang and then use Greasefang to crew vehicles, so we use those right away that same turn, whether or not we've reanimated them with Greasefang then, to attack all of our opponents who only have one creature left, or we use our creatures to crew our vehicles that we have that we want to put back in the graveyard, then use the Eternal Wanderer to destroy those creatures, or to make us sacrifice those crewed vehicles, which are now in the graveyard. We go to combat, and Greasefang, the creature we chose to keep, reanimates at least one of them, or reanimates one of them, and then crews it, and we get to attack him with that. Yeah, we get to do the same thing. So yeah, the Eternal Wanderer does a lot for us, protects herself, can protect herself even more, can fix our things or give us more value, and is a board wipe. Love her. And that covers all of the cards in our support sections. We're going to keep things going now with some of our supplemental sections that are cards that round out our tags for the things we've already seen and also show us the other ways that our cards are working for us, starting with our payoff section. So we have Basim, as we've already seen. Basim gives us a payoff every time we cast a historic spell by drawing us a card and becoming unblockable, and can get bigger from that. Sai pays us off whenever we cast artifact spells by making us a Thopter. The Uthros Research Craft, once it has 3 charge counters on it or more, pays us off when we cast artifact spells by drawing us a card. The Thousand Moons Smithy pays us off by us having plenty of artifacts and creatures in play because it lets us transform it into a mana rock. And the Pridwin pays us off whenever we have non-token artifacts enter by giving us these knights that can become 4/4s after being 2/2s. So that is a pretty small payoff section. That's okay, because we have a bigger synergy section. These are all cards that care about the count of things we have or help us do what we're trying to do. So Battle of the Black Flag cares about us having historic spells, so it works both ways for our historic stuff. Brotherhood Vertibird cares about the number of artifacts we control, that's its power. We haven't seen Kotori, Pilot Prodigy. Kotori is the face commander of the deck that Shorikai comes from, and is paired with Shorikai in the fiction. They consider themselves sort of a melded being. A very cool card. Kotori is 1 a white and a blue for a 2/4 legendary Moonfolk pilot, again, historic, that gives our vehicles crew 2. What that means is every vehicle has its own crew ability and gains an additional crew ability of just 2, so that any of our creatures that has a power of 2 or greater, or can crew things as though their power were greater than it is able to crew any of our vehicles, because they all can just have the crew 2 ability that Kotori gives them activated, which means Kotori can crew anything, including Shorikai. And at the beginning of combat on our turn, target artifact creature we control gains lifelink and vigilance until end of turn. So notably, this doesn't work the way with Greasefang the way that you want it to. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, which is the same time Greasefang triggers. So we put both those triggers on the stack at the same time, and we can choose the order of them, but when we put Kotori's trigger on the stack, we have to choose our target then. So what that means is Kotori needs to have, or something, needs to have already crewed one of our vehicles in order for this to be workable, because we have to target an artifact creature. We cannot target just a vehicle that hasn't already been crewed, because at that point, it's not an artifact creature, it's just an artifact. And if we try to target that artifact and then crew in response, it's not a valid target because it can only be chosen as a target if it's already an artifact creature. So this is a powerful ability, giving lifelink and vigilance to one of our artifact creatures, particularly one of our crewed vehicles. But we do want to make sure that we have crewed that vehicle prior to combat in order to target it with Kotori's triggered ability. But that's easy to do because Kotori makes all of the vehicles that we already have in play when Greasefang triggers able to be crewed with a power of just 2, which is what Kotori herself has. So this is not giving us the ability to make our vehicle that we've brought back with Greasefang have lifelink and vigilance. We can't target it that way. But whatever we bring back with Greasefang does have crew 2 because Kotori's in play and it's a vehicle we control. So even something like our Salvation Engine, which has normally a value of 6, we could crew it with anything, including Greasefang. So yeah. We've seen the Uthroth Researchcraft. It doesn't just pay us off by drawing us cards whenever we cast an artifact spell, once it's got 3 charge counters, but once it has 12 charge counters, it synergizes because it gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control. Surge Hacker Mech does damage based on the number of vehicles we control, does twice that much damage. Thousand Moon Smithy is synergistic because the gnome soldiers that it makes care about the number of artifacts and creatures that we control. The Eternal Wanderer synergizes with us in the way that we're able to make those, we're able to flicker our artifacts and creatures with her +1 ability, which lets us bring things back with Greasefang and then cheat on Greasefang's bounce delayed trigger by not having to bounce them. Demonic Junker has affinity for artifacts, which again cares about the number of artifacts we have. And we have not seen Metalwork Colossus. This is our most expensive spell. By far, it's 11 generic mana. We have spells representing mana values from 1 all the way to 8, but we don't have any 9s or 10s, so we can't use Oswald Fiddlebender to go and fetch up our Metalwork Colossus, unfortunately, because we don't have the mana values in there. Now, if we happen somehow to steal a 10 mana artifact creature from an opponent, then with like Possession Engine maybe, then yes, we can use that with Oswald to get the Colossus. But typically, we don't mind, because it costs X generic mana less to cast, where X is the total mana value of non-creature artifacts we control. Meaning, if we crew one of our vehicles, it's a creature, it's an artifact creature, so it stops providing this discount. But if it's prior to combat, or prior to our crewing those vehicles, then they are non-creature artifacts, and if their mana value adds up to 11 or more, then this is a free 10/10. It costs us 0 mana. Otherwise, we want to make sure that we're casting this at a time where the discount it's giving us is pretty good. It's also the case that if we sacrifice 2 of our artifacts, maybe we're trying to get our vehicles off the battlefield so we can put them back in the graveyard so that we can bring them back with Greasefang again, then if we do that, we can return the Colossus back to our hand. This is really great because maybe what we do is we sacrifice those artifacts, which makes the Colossus not have as much of a discount anymore, but then Greasefang reanimates one of those artifacts, we don't crew it, so it's still a non-creature, and then we go to the second main phase and we can recast the Metalwork Colossus for cheap or free, and we've been able to get the Enters trigger back from that vehicle that we sacrificed. You know, it's fun ways to do loops with the Metalwork Colossus, and a 10/10 as a blocker or an attacker is nothing to sneeze at. So that covers our synergy section. Next up, we have our graveyard section. This is a big one, but we've seen a lot of these already. These are ways to either get cards into the graveyard or to get value from cards that are in the graveyard. So Cynical Loner is first. This is from Duskmourn. 1 and a black for a 3/1 human survivor that can't be blocked by Glimmers. We are not running any Glimmers in this deck, but you never know. Someone else might be running a Duskmourn deck or have Changelings in play. So worth remembering that that's the case with this Loner. However, we're generally not attacking with her, because the Cynical Loner we're using as a 3/1 pilot to crew our vehicles. The reason being, it has a survival ability. At the beginning of our second main phase, if the Cynical Loner is tapped, we can search our library for a card and put it in our graveyard and shuffle. So we get a free Entomb with the Cynical Loner as long as it's tapped at the start of our second main phase, which means we just have to crew something with it, and we get something for free into our graveyard that we can use next turn. That's awesome. Being able to do this, even if we're over crewing, like I mentioned earlier in the video, just as a way to tap the Loner down, that really helps us out. Next, we've seen Deadly Dispute. It gives us a sacrifice outlet in the form of its additional cost to put something in the graveyard. Next, we have Iron Shield Elf. This is from Lorwyn Eclipsed, recent Lorwyn set. 1 and a black for a 3/1 Elf Warrior that has discard a card, and this creature gains indestructible until end of turn, and you tap it. So this is a cool effect, because tapping it is part of the effect, not part of the cost. Meaning we can activate this even if the elf is already tapped, because maybe it has crewed something, maybe it's attacking, whatever it may be, because the cost of it is just discarding a card, which again puts things in our graveyard. That's what we want to happen anyway. And it protects the elf, and then it taps it, assuming it's already untapped. So this is an extremely powerful, repeatable way to get things into our graveyard, which, as we saw earlier with Key to the City, is great in this deck, because if something that Greasefang brings back survives combat, it's going to bounce to the back to our hand at the end step if we don't find another way to sacrifice it. So being able to just throw it back in the graveyard with Iron Shield Elf and then get the value of the elf becoming indestructible in the process is very strong. So we can use this like maybe we have a vehicle that Greasefang's brought back and then has bounced back to our hand. On an opponent's turn, they attack us with something that doesn't have trample. We block with the elf. Before combat damage, we discard the vehicle we want to get back in our graveyard, make the elf indestructible, we get to keep it, it doesn't matter that it's tapped, it's already blocked, and we're all set for next turn. We've seen Key to the City, it does that tap to discard a card to make one target creature unblockable this turn. For the reasons I just explained, it's very good, and what we saw from it earlier. Oswald Fiddlebender lets us sacrifice an artifact, which puts it into the graveyard. Rite of Oblivion requires us to sacrifice a non-land permanent in order to cast it. Seasoned Hallowblade is Iron Shield Elf. It's just, rather than being 1 and a black, it's 1 and a white, and rather than being an elf warrior, it's a human warrior. It's still a 3/1, and even though its ability is worded in a different order, it's discard a card, tap this creature, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. As opposed to discard a card, this creature gains indestructible until end of turn, tap it. So it's a little bit different order, but its effects are still on the right side of the colon, so it works the same way. The reason I know how well Iron Shield Elf works is because it works exactly like the Hallowblade, and I've used the Hallowblade a bunch of times when playing Greasefang. So these are both great, repeatable discard outlets that can help us in other ways too, and crew quite well. We've seen the Smuggler's Copter. It lets us draw, and if we do, we discard. So that puts cards in our graveyard. Ballad of the Black Flag mills us 3 different times, puts cards in our graveyard. Braids can let us sacrifice something, so a sack outlet puts cards in our graveyard. Emry, Lurker of the Loch is next. This is 2 and a blue for a 1/2 legendary, historic, Merfolk Wizard, originally from Throne of Eldraine, that has affinity for artifacts. So could also be in our synergy section if we wanted to put her there. Not as relevant for us because her discount would only be 2, down to just a single blue mana, but still relevant for us. When Emry enters, we mill 4 cards, so that puts cards on our graveyard, and we can tap Emry and choose an artifact card in our graveyard, and we can cast it this turn. We still have to pay for it, timing rules still apply, but we get the ability to cast it from our graveyard and repeatedly recur our artifacts whenever we need to. If there's a trigger we have that says, when you cast an artifact spell, maybe that's relevant to us. If there's an artifact in our graveyard that we can't bring back with Greasefang, or if we don't have Greasefang out at that time, we can recast things with Emry. Very powerful for us. Sai lets us pay 1 and a blue and sack 2 artifacts to draw a card. The Falcon can sacrifice itself when it does combat damage to a player. Conqueror's Galleon, on the back side, lets us draw and discard. All of these are ways to put cards in our graveyard. Mole Module lets us mill 4 when it does combat damage to a player. Demonic Junker lets us destroy up to 1 target creature that each player controls, which includes us, and if we destroy one of our own creatures, it gets 2 counters, so that destroyed creature is now in the graveyard. Valor's Flagship lets us cycle it, which puts it in the graveyard in the ways that I described earlier when we were talking about it. And Metalwork Colossus has us sacrifice 2 artifacts to bring it back from our graveyard to our hand, which is a recursion effect, so that's our graveyard section. Let's talk about recursion. These are all things that we can use from the graveyard or give us access to things in our graveyard. Rite of Oblivion has flashback, we can cast it from the graveyard. Emry, for the reasons we just saw, lets us tap her in order to cast an artifact from our graveyard. The Falcon can be returned from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped for 4 and a black, but also, when it does combat damage to a player, if we sacrifice it, we can return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Like I mentioned, a great way to get Greasefang back into play if she dies. Conqueror's Galleon, very expensive, but on the back side, we can pay 6 and tap to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. Creature card, that is. The Indomitable can come back and can be cast from the graveyard as long as we have 3 or more tapped pirates and/or vehicles. Do we have any pirates in this deck? I don't think that we do. No, we have pilots, no pirates. Salvation Engine, when it attacks, we return up to 1 artifact card from our graveyard straight to the battlefield, and Metalwork Colossus can come back from the graveyard to our hand if we sack 2 artifacts. And that's our recursion section. Next up, I want to go over the fact that we have these 11 cards that can make tokens for us. We've seen all of them already, but we'll just blow through it. So Reckoner Bankbuster, once its last charge counter is removed as part of its activated ability, we make a pilot, a Neon Dynasty pilot token, plus a treasure token, and we draw our third card. Night Scythe enters, we get a 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. Prodigy's Prototype gives us a 1/1 Kamigawa pilot whenever one or more vehicles we control attack. Sai makes us a 1/1 Flying Thopter whenever we cast an artifact spell. Thousand Moon Smithy makes us a gnome artifact creature with power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures we control when it enters and whenever we use its backside's mana to cast an artifact or creature spell. Cybership does not make tokens. I want to be very clear about this. When it does combat damage to a player, we put the top 2 cards of that player's library onto the battlefield face down under our control as 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. Those are creatures. They are cards, they are not tokens. It's in this section, however, because in this deck, we use them the same way we would use tokens. They are sacrifice fodder, they are there for us to crew with. Yeah. It gives us what I would consider sort of virtual creatures, which is kind of what tokens are, since they aren't cards in our deck. So it's used the same way as tokens. I know it might be confusing to put it in the token section, but this is how I tag cards for my own uses, because I want to know what the cards are doing for me, not just what they do. So this is not making tokens, but it's giving us an equivalent of that. That's why it's here. The Eternal Wanderer, however, can make a token, a 2/2 Samurai with double strike, just to 0. The Pridwin, every time we have a non-token artifact enter under our control, we get a 2/2 Knight that can become a 4/4 if we've had an artifact enter this turn. Rolling Hamsphere attacks and makes 3 red hamsters every time. Valor's Flagship, if we cycle it, can make us a number of Aetherdrift pilots, which are not quite the same as Neon Dynasty pilots, but they're basically the same in this deck. And Parhelion 2, when it attacks, makes 2 attacking essentially Sarah Angels, 4/4 flying Vigilant Angel creature tokens. And that's our token section. We've got a few small sections now. Here's a burn section. Braids, if our opponents don't sacrifice permanent with the same that shares a type with whatever we sacrifice it to our end step trigger, they lose 2 life, and we draw a card for each one. Night Paladin enters, does 4 damage to each opponent. Rolling Hamsphere attacks and does damage to any target equal to the number of hamsters that we control. So pretty good. We have more burn options in that considering section I mentioned at the top of the video, which is at the bottom of our deck, the considering section. So if you like the idea of direct damage in a deck like this, or if you want to run things like, Marionette Master, Marionette Apprentice, those kinds of cards, this is a good section for those to go in. We also have an evasion section. We've already seen them both. Key to the City can make can make an attacking creature, or can make a creature, I should just say, unblockable this turn. And Moo gives all of our vehicles flying, which is pretty nice. And that is our evasion section, so we only have one more, and it's just this one Salvation Engine in our pump section. Again, there's other cards in the considering section that can pump up our creatures, like the Salvation Engine does, giving all of our artifact creatures other than itself, +2/+2. I haven't always found that pump effect is necessary, but it sure is nice as a way to close things out, especially when we're bringing something back from the battle or from the graveyard to the battlefield every time the engine attacks. So that covers all of the spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with our basics. It is very sad to see a number 13 here, not because it's unlucky, but because it's a low number. I usually put many more basics in my library, or at least a few in my deck, but we just needed all of these different dual lands and utility lands. So yeah, it ends up working out totally fine for us, as you will see soon. But yeah, we're running more white than blue and a little bit more blue than black. But because we have so many blue cards that are double blue pips, and because I always like to try and make my mix of basics skew a little bit more toward being even than it being exactly the perfect proportions, if I can help it, just because I always want to make sure I have the right mana to cast my commanders as soon as possible. This mix ends up being exactly what we want it to be: 4 islands, 5 plains, 4 swamps. We're also running the bicycle lands. We'll use Fetid Pools as an example. These are lands that are dual typed. So Fetid Pools is an island and is a swamp, and so therefore it taps for blue or black inherently. It is a tap land, but it counts as an island and it counts as a swamp, and that's pretty great for us. and we can cycle it for 2 generic mana, meaning we pay 2 and discard it from our hand to draw a card. This is something we would do if we're really hungry for card draw, or if it's late game and we have plenty of lands in play and we don't need another one. So being able to put this in our graveyard is pretty nice, just as a way to turn a land draw into hopefully something else. However, it is also dual typed, which is relevant because, I should just mention, all of these bicycle lands work the same way, they just have different types, like the new Umbral Expanse from Secrets of Strixhaven Commander, new as of time of recording, is a plains and a swamp. Irrigated Farmland is a plains and an island. Vetted Pools is an island and a swamp. The reason those types are relevant is because we're running these check lands. The check land cycle, we'll use Glacial Fortress as an example, are lands that tap for one of 2 colors and enter tapped unless we control a land with a type related to those colors. So Glacial Fortress comes in tapped unless we control a plains or an island, and it taps for white or blue, which is great because we do have 5 plains and 4 islands, but also every one of these bicycle lands counts to make any of our check lands come in untapped, because Fetid Pools is an island, Umbral Expanse is a plains, Irrigated Farmland is both. So any of those 3, plus those 9 basics, will give our Glacial Fortress the ability to come in untapped. And since we are running all 3 bicycle lands, and we also have the full cycle of Tango lands, then that means we have 15 different cards in the deck to make Glacial Fortress come in untapped. So what I like to do in my decks is generally, if I have 18 cards with basic types, then I'll run the check lands, because they're a great, inexpensive inclusion that gives us good mana fixing, and oftentimes is an untapped duel when they come in. So pretty nice for us. I am looking forward to Drowned Catacombs dropping in price when presumably Reality Fracture comes out, since I think those check lands are going to get reprinted in the Commander products, as well as we're going to have the continuation of the slow land cycle. Speaking of which, if you want to upgrade these check lands, the slow lands are great options. If you want to upgrade the bicycle lands, I might say the shock lands are good, or if you're looking for something that gives you not real card advantage, but virtual card advantage, and also has the basic types, the surveil lands would be great options to replace the bicycle lands in this deck, because you can surveil something into our graveyard that we might want to get back with Greasefang later. We're running these 5 fixing lands. Of course, we're running Command Tower. It is a land that comes in untapped and has the same text as Arcane Signet. It makes 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So blue, white, or black. We'll say it in a different order this time. So yeah, an untapped tri-land, of course we're going to run this. We would run it if it was a tapped tri-land, because we are. That's Path of Ancestry. It's a tap land with the same text as Command Tower, but it also says when we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. So interestingly, there are plenty of cards in this deck that make pilot tokens, but there are only 2 other cards that have the pilot type the way that Greasefang does. And we don't have any cards in the deck that are rats, unfortunately, other than Greasefang herself. But we can cast Greasefang and get the scry using Path of Ancestry's mana, because of course Greasefang shares types with herself. Shorikai does not have any creature types, and so therefore isn't applicable for Path of Ancestry. We do not get to cast vehicles and get the scry, because vehicle is an artifact type, not a creature type, just so you know. We're running Exotic Orchard, where if Command Tower is a land version of Arcane Signet, this is a land tower or a land version of Felwar Stone. It makes 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So everything I said about Felwar Stone is still true here. Very good for us in terms of fixing. Also, if an opponent has an Exotic Orchard of their own, then it sees our other lands, and our orchard sees their orchard, which means our orchard can make the same colors that our other lands can make. It's kind of weird, but that's how it works. We're running Myriad Landscape. This is a little bit of acceleration in our land base, albeit slow acceleration, if you'll pardon the oxymoron. It comes in tapped, taps for colorless, and we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to search for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So in this deck, 2 basic plains, 2 basic swamps, or 2 basic islands. And then we put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So they do come in tapped, this comes in tapped, and we have to pay and sack this to go find them, and we have to have them share a land type. But that's 1 land drop, Myriad Landscape, filled up, and we end up with 2 lands in play. So it doesn't accelerate us fast, but it does accelerate us. The same is true of Temple of the False God. This is a untapped land that I know not everyone loves, but it makes 2 colorless mana, like Sol Ring. It is a soul land. We just can't activate it unless we control at least 4 other lands, so 5 including itself. So even though this is acceleration in our land base, not everyone likes it because you can't use it early on until you've got more lands in play. However, if this is your 5th land, you're going from making 4 mana to making 6 mana, and that's great in a deck that has a lot of cards that require a lot of mana. Just 2 generic can do a lot for us, and this is a strong card, just not always in the kind of decks that are a little bit more higher powered than this deck. But for these kind of decks, I think Temple of the False God works great. We're running all 3 Pain lands, plus a bonus one. We'll use Caves of Koilos as an example. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, but it also taps for white or black if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. So the way I like to explain these things is always run them, because it's an untapped dual land. If you don't need colored mana, you just tap it for colorless mana. If you need colored mana, then what does it mean to need colored mana? Well, it means that without that colored mana, you couldn't cast the spell you're trying to cast. So in a way, are you willing to pay 1 life in order to cast an extra spell this turn? I would pay 1 life to cast an extra spell every turn. I would do that 6, 7, 8 times in a game, because I know that even though I'm down by 6 to 8 life from where I would be, I've also cast 6 to 8 more spells than I would have cast. That's just so very powerful when you think of it, especially in a format that has 40 life. And again, if you don't need the colored mana, you can always tap it for colorless mana. The Pain lands are terrific. They're all in the different colors. The only one that's different and not part of the cycle is Spire of Industry. This is a land that taps for colorless mana, or we can tap it and pay a life to make 1 mana of any color, but we can only do it if we control an artifact. We only have to control the artifact though. It doesn't mean 1 mana of any color that you can only spend on artifact spells. We just have to control an artifact, and it's a tri-land Pain land. Love it. Next up, we've got Tango lands. These are the sort of mirror to our bicycle lands. They are dual typed, of course, like Eclipse Step. This is a plains and a swamp. It makes white and black for that reason, and it enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. So it's true, we only have 13 basics in the library, but we might be able to get them out in time to get this out and have it come in untapped, and if we don't, that's okay. It's still contributing to our land types for our check lands, and it's still a tapped duel. There's nothing wrong with it. So yeah, we've got, of course, all 3 of our Tango lands in this cycle. We're running Arcane Sanctum. This is a tri-land. It comes in tapped, and it taps for all of our colors. So it's a worse Path of Ancestry, which is a worse command tower, and even with that, this is still absolutely worth running in our deck. If you would want to upgrade this, Rafine's Tower is the Triome version of it. It's the same as this, except it also has cycling for 3 generic, and it has all 3 of the basic land types matching these colors. Just a lot more expensive. Finally, we've got these 6 utility lands. In the kind of decks that I build for this channel, they are of a power level that the pods who want them are typically places where people don't want land denial. They don't want to see their lands getting destroyed, typically. And that's a fair way to play Commander. The problem is, sometimes there is a problematic non-basic in play. Somebody is running a Rogue's Passage, and their Voltron commander is swinging in unblockably. Their game plan is empowered too much by their land. Or they're running a Glacial Chasm, and we're not able to do damage to them. Our game plan is impeded by their land. In either case, that land, because it's helping them too much or hurting us, is a threat. And this is a game of threats and answers. So Demolition Field is my answer for those situations, especially because it's only a one of in the deck. That's a card that can interact with lands, so it's usually pretty permissible even at those kinds of tables. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls, and that opponent then gets to search their library for a basic and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, even because we both have a land in the graveyard, and the lands we had come in are basics that are untapped, assuming we had basics left in our libraries. So we haven't denied our opponent mana or denied us mana, assuming the land that we destroyed wasn't making more than 1 mana. But this is an answer that's appropriate for even tables that don't like land destruction, just because you have to have an answer to it sometimes. Yeah. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is next. This is a legendary land, so we do have a historic land in our deck. Do we have any others in this section? No, it doesn't look like. But we do have this, so this lets us use Crystal Skull to play this off the top of our library if we wanted to. Neat. It's an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to make each player draw a card and then discard a card. This can be really helpful for us with our opponents, but it's mostly helpful for us because remember, putting cards in our graveyard is sort of like card advantage for us, and then we're getting a card in hand as well, so we've got selection. Yeah, pretty solid. Mech Hanger is next. This is a untapped land, taps for colorless, or we can tap it for 1 mana of any color, and but only use that colored mana to cast pilots or vehicle spells. We've got a lot of vehicles in this deck, and we've got a couple of pilots. So that includes Greasefang and Kotori, and I think, is that the only other pilot we have? We have 3 pilots. So yeah, we have 1 more pilot in the deck that we could use this mana for. And that's pretty good. So untapped to make colorless, or makes colored mana for pilots or any of our mini vehicles. And we can pay 3 and tap it, and target vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So another way, like we have with our Peacekeeper mech, I think it's called, to spend mana and essentially crew a vehicle at instant speed. Pretty sweet. Nice sneaky way to do it, especially because it's in our land base. Monumental Henge is next. This is a Modern Horizons 3 land that comes in tapped unless we control the plains, and taps for white, so it's another good white source for us. We can also pay 2 and double white, and tap it to look at the top 5 cards of our library, reveal a historic card from among them, and put it in our hand, and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this is just what the Weatherlight does. So that's pretty nice as a repeatable way to do it in our land base. Rogue's Passage is next. When I described how you could do tricky things by making a creature unblockable with Key to the City, everything I said there also applies to Rogue's Passage. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make a creature unblockable this turn. Usually, we want to use this on one of our creatures that is big enough, being reanimated by Greasefang or not, that we're going to be able to swing in for lethal damage or just a lot of damage. But we can also use this on opponents' creatures, whether politically or not, if we've got the mana to do so. Usually, this deck is a little mana hungry because we have a lot of big creatures in it, but sometimes we've got the mana lying around, or sometimes it's better spent making something unblockable, whether it's our creature or someone else's. Finally, we're running a Swarm Yard. I'm using the Stellar Sights printing from Edge of Eternities because it happens to be the least expensive one, and it's also beautiful. Look at these. I really like these lands. I don't typically do a lot of like alternate arts in my decks. I'll do Mystical Archive cards and things like that, but the Stellar Sights printings are just really cool. I just like this. So yeah, the Swarm Yard is an untapped land, comes in untapped and taps for colorless mana. We can also tap it to regenerate target insect, spider, rat, or squirrel. Great. We don't have any insects in this deck, I don't think. Nope. We don't have any squirrels. We don't have any spiders, but we do have 1 rat, and that's Greasefang. So regenerate means we essentially put a shield around Greasefang, which means the next time that Greasefang would be destroyed, instead we tap it, we remove all damage from it, and we heal all damage on it. So regenerate's an old mechanic, but since we've got the access to a land that costs us no mana other than tapping it, instead of mana, in order to protect our commander, who our whole deck is built around, Swarm Yard is so powerful for us. Regenerate obviously can't protect Greasefang from exile effects or bounce or tuck effects, anything like that. We can always put her back in the command zone, but being able to regenerate her is really strong, and yeah, so not a bad inclusion for a deck with a rat commander. And that sums it up. Again, Magic Presents Pride events are scheduled sometime between June 5th and 14th, so check with your LGS for their event schedule and get brewing. It's a great event and I love it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe, ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live. Consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/secondmonitormagic or becoming a member on this channel on YouTube. But the way you can help me out most is by remembering that magic is fun. You should play more Magic.